In the picturesque coastal town of Millhaven, where the salty breeze carries whispers of secrets and lies, a tragedy was brewing beneath the surface of everyday life. The quaint streets, lined with colorful boutiques and cozy cafes, masked a web of deceit that would soon unravel, leaving the community shaken to its core. At the heart of this tale are three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Lachlan Thorne, a man desperate for financial stability and respect. Zara Callahan, a talented chef with dreams bigger than the small town could contain. And Enzo Rossi, the charismatic owner of a popular Italian restaurant. To the outside world, Lachlan and Zara appeared to be the perfect couple, young and in love with a bright future ahead. Their engagement was the talk of the town, a beacon of hope in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming in their relationship, cracks that would soon split wide open. Enzo, with his easy charm and successful business, seemed to have it all. His restaurant was a local institution, and his marriage to Vivian, a respected member of the town council, was envied by many. Yet, behind closed doors, Enzo harbored his own dissatisfactions and desires. As summer faded into autumn, the stage was set for a series of events that would lead to betrayal, blackmail, and ultimately, bloodshed. The story of how these three lives collided is a cautionary tale of passion, greed, and the devastating consequences of keeping secrets in a town where the truth always finds its way to the surface. Lachlan Thorne's story began far from the shores of Millhaven, in a struggling mining town where dreams went to die. The youngest of 4 children, Lachlan grew up watching his father descend into the depths of the earth day after day, only to return home beaten down by the relentless toil. His mother, a part-time seamstress, struggled to keep the family afloat, her fingers constantly pricked by needles as she worked late into the night. From an early age, Lachlan vowed he would escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped his parents. He threw himself into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university in the city. But the transition from his humble beginnings to the world of academia proved more challenging than he anticipated. Surrounded by wealthy peers who seemed to navigate college life with ease, Lachlan felt like an outsider, constantly battling the feeling that he didn't belong. Despite his best efforts, Lachlan's insecurities began to manifest in self-destructive behaviors. He developed a gambling habit, convinced that one big win could solve all his problems. Instead, it left him deeper in debt, forcing him to take on multiple part-time jobs just to stay afloat. By the time he graduated, the promise of a bright future had dimmed considerably. Lachlan drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing in the corporate world. His resume became a patchwork of short-term positions and gaps, each failure chipping away at his self-esteem. As his 30th birthday approached, he found himself back in a small town, not unlike the one he had tried so hard to escape. It was in Millhaven that Lachlan's luck seemed to change. He landed a job as a marketing manager for a local brewery, a position that finally allowed him to showcase his skills. More importantly, it was here that he met Zara Callahan. Their whirlwind romance offered Lachlan a glimpse of the life he had always dreamed of. Successful, respected, and loved. When he proposed to Zara after just 6 months of dating, Lachlan truly believed he had finally overcome his past. But old habits die hard, and the pressure to provide Zara with the life he thought she deserved began to weigh heavily on him. As wedding plans progressed, Lachlan found himself once again drawn to the false promise of easy money, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Zara Callahan's journey to Millhaven was paved with both passion and pain. Born to a free-spirited mother and an absent father, Zara spent her childhood bouncing between relatives' homes and short-term apartments. Her mother, Fiona, was a talented artist, but struggled with substance abuse, leaving young Zara to fend for herself more often than not. It was during one of their stays with Zara's maternal grandmother that she discovered her love for cooking. In her grandmother's warm, fragrant kitchen, Zara found solace and stability. She would spend hours watching the elderly woman transform simple ingredients into mouth-watering dishes, soaking up every technique and family recipe like a sponge. As Zara entered her teenage years, her mother's addiction worsened. At 15, Zara made the difficult decision to leave her mother's care, moving in permanently with her grandmother. It was a choice that haunted her, but one that allowed her to focus on her dreams. She threw herself into her culinary pursuits, working part-time at local restaurants while excelling in her high school's home economics classes. Zara's talent didn't go unnoticed. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious culinary school, where she honed her skills and developed her own unique style. Her instructors praised her innovative approach to traditional dishes, and her fellow students admired her dedication and creativity. However, just as Zara was about to graduate, tragedy struck. Her grandmother passed away suddenly, leaving Zara feeling unmoored once again. Grief-stricken and unsure of her next move, she deferred her dreams of working in a big city restaurant and returned to her grandmother's house in Millhaven. It was meant to be temporary, just long enough to settle her grandmother's affairs. But when she heard that the renowned restaurant was hiring, Zara saw an opportunity to gain experience. While figuring out her next steps, she impressed Enzo Rossi with her skills and passion, and what was supposed to be a short-term position turned into years. Zara threw herself into her work, quickly rising through the ranks to become the restaurant's sous chef. She found a sense of family among her co-workers and began to put down roots in Millhaven. When she met Lachlan, it seemed like the final piece of her life was falling into place. Little did she know that the stability she had worked so hard to achieve was about to be shattered by a web of desire, deceit, and desperation. The restaurant stood as a testament to Enzo Rossi's unwavering ambition and culinary expertise. The restaurant, with its warm terracotta walls and the intoxicating aroma of authentic Italian cuisine, had been Enzo's dream since he first set foot in Millhaven 20 years ago. A first-generation immigrant, Enzo had arrived with little more than a suitcase full of his nonna's recipes and an unshakable determination to succeed. The early years were a struggle, with Enzo working grueling hours to establish his restaurant's reputation. His charm and culinary skills gradually won over the initially skeptical locals, and the restaurant became the go-to spot for everything from first dates to golden wedding anniversaries. Enzo took pride in knowing his regular customers by name, always ready with a warm smile and a perfectly paired wine recommendation. It was during this period of growing success that Enzo met Vivian, a local girl from a well-respected family. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding that was the talk of Millhaven for months. Vivian, with her sharp business acumen, helped streamline the restaurant's operations, allowing Enzo to focus on what he loved most, creating exquisite dishes in the kitchen. On the surface, Enzo appeared to have it all: a thriving business, a beautiful wife, and the respect of the community. He became a pillar of Millhaven society, sponsoring local events and mentoring aspiring chefs at the high school. His annual charity dinners were legendary, raising substantial funds for various community projects. However, as the years passed, cracks began to appear in Enzo's seemingly perfect life. The long hours at the restaurant took their toll on his marriage. Vivian, now deeply involved in local politics, had less and less time for the romantic gestures that had once characterized their relationship. Their conversations, once filled with dreams and laughter, became focused on business strategies and social obligations. Enzo found himself increasingly restless, yearning for the passion that seemed to have faded from his life. He threw himself into his work, constantly innovating and expanding the restaurant's menu. But even his beloved kitchen began to feel like a gilded cage, trapping him in a life that no longer brought him joy. As he approached his 50th birthday, Enzo felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. He began to question the choices that had led him to this point, wondering if he had sacrificed too much of himself in pursuit of success. It was in this state of emotional vulnerability that Enzo first began to see Zara as more than just his talented sous chef, setting the stage for a relationship that would have far-reaching and ultimately tragic consequences. The spark between Enzo and Zara ignited on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in late autumn. The restaurant was uncharacteristically quiet, with only a handful of patrons braving the stormy weather. As closing time approached, Enzo found himself alone in the kitchen with Zara, both of them working in comfortable silence to prepare for the next day. It was Zara who broke the quiet, suggesting a new twist on one of the restaurant's classic dishes. Enzo, intrigued, invited her to demonstrate. As they worked side by side, chopping herbs and sautéing vegetables, Enzo was struck by Zara's passion and creativity. Her eyes lit up as she explained her ideas, and Enzo found himself drawn in not just by her culinary skills, but by her vibrant energy. As they tasted the finished dish together, their eyes met over the steaming plate. In that moment, something shifted between them. Enzo, caught off guard by the intensity of his feelings, made a casual comment about the late hour and suggested they call it a night. But as Zara gathered her things to leave, a clap of thunder startled her, causing her to drop her bag. Enzo rushed to help, and as they both reached for the scattered contents, their hands touched. The physical contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through both of them. Before either could fully process what was happening, they found themselves in each other's arms, sharing a passionate kiss that left them both breathless and confused. In the days that followed, Enzo and Zara tried to maintain a professional distance, but the tension between them was palpable. Stolen glances across the kitchen, lingering touches as they passed each other in the narrow hallways. It was only a matter of time before they gave in to their desires. Their first real encounter happened after hours in Enzo's office. What started as a discussion about the next season's menu quickly evolved into a heated expression of their pent-up passion. As they lay tangled together on the small leather sofa, both Enzo and Zara knew they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For Zara, the affair was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of being with Enzo was constantly at war with her guilt over betraying Lachlan. She told herself it was just a physical thing, that her feelings for her fiancé remained unchanged. But as the weeks passed, she found herself increasingly drawn to Enzo, not just physically but emotionally as well. Enzo, for his part, felt rejuvenated by the relationship. With Zara, he rediscovered the passion he had been missing both in and out of the kitchen. He convinced himself that he deserved this happiness, that the years of dedication to his wife and his business entitled him to this secret indulgence. As summer turned to fall, their affair deepened, becoming more than just stolen moments of physical intimacy. Neither Enzo nor Zara were prepared for the storm that was brewing, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Lachlan Thorne prided himself on his ability to read people, a skill honed through years of navigating the corporate world. So when Zara's behavior began to change subtly, he noticed. It started with small things. She was working later hours, seemed distracted during their time together, and was constantly checking her phone. At first, Lachlan attributed it to the stress of wedding planning and her increased responsibilities at the restaurant. But as the weeks passed, a nagging suspicion began to take root in his mind. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, ostensibly watching a movie together, Lachlan observed Zara smiling at her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed out a message. When he casually asked who she was texting, Zara's response was too quick, too rehearsed. "A coworker?" she said, discussing a new recipe. But the flush on her cheeks and the way she quickly locked her phone told a different story. Determined to uncover the truth, Lachlan began to pay closer attention to Zara's schedule and movements. He noted the nights she came home particularly late, the weekends she claimed to be doing inventory at the restaurant. He even drove by the restaurant a few times, noting with growing unease that Zara's car was often the only one in the parking lot, besides Enzo's distinctive vintage Alfa Romeo. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a crisp, autumn evening. Lachlan, unable to shake his suspicions, decided to surprise Zara at work. As he approached the restaurant, he saw two figures silhouetted in the dim light of the kitchen. Through the window, he watched in stunned silence as Enzo pulled Zara close, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The sight hit Lachlan like a physical blow. He stumbled back to his car, his mind reeling. All the little inconsistencies, the late nights, the distracted behavior, it all made sense now. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, was having an affair with her boss. As he sat in his car watching the restaurant, a toxic mixture of emotions coursed through him. Hurt, betrayal, anger, but also surprisingly a cold calculation. Lachlan had always prided himself on his ability to turn situations to his advantage, and as the initial shock wore off, his mind began to work. He thought about the upcoming wedding, the deposits they had already paid. He thought about the shame of calling it off, of admitting to friends and family that he had been deceived. And then he thought about the restaurant, about Enzo's wealth and success. A plan began to form in Lachlan's mind. If Zara thought she could betray him and get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. He would make her pay, quite literally, and in doing so, he would secure the financial stability he had always craved. As he started his car and drove away from the restaurant, Lachlan's hurt and betrayal hardened into resolve. Zara's infidelity would be her downfall, and his ticket to the life he deserved. Lachlan bided his time, carefully planning his next move. He needed irrefutable evidence before confronting Zara. Over the next week, He meticulously documented her comings and goings, even going so far as to plant a small voice-activated recorder in her car. It was an invasion of privacy that made him feel dirty, but he justified it as necessary, given the circumstances. When he finally had what he needed, a recording of Zara and Enzo in an intimate conversation that left no doubt about their relationship, Lachlan set his plan in motion. He chose a quiet Sunday morning, when Zara was relaxed and off guard, to spring his trap. "Lachlan, I know about you and Enzo," he said without preamble as Zara sipped her coffee. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. Her face, drained of color, told him everything he needed to know. What followed was a conversation filled with tears, recriminations, and desperate pleas. Zara begged for forgiveness, swearing that the affair meant nothing, that Lachlan was the one she truly loved. But Lachlan had steeled himself against her explanations. He laid out his terms coldly. If she wanted to keep their engagement intact and avoid the scandal of her affair being exposed, she would have to do exactly as he said. His demands were simple yet devastating. Zara would use her position at the restaurant to embezzle money, skimming from the daily takings and manipulating the books to cover her tracks. The amount would start small but increase over time. Lachlan framed it as restitution, compensation for the hurt and humiliation she had caused him. Zara, caught between her guilt and her fear of losing everything, reluctantly agreed. She rationalized that it would be temporary, that she could find a way out of this situation without anyone getting hurt. But deep down, she knew she had set foot on a dangerous path. The scheme began slowly. Zara, leveraging her trusted position and her access to the restaurant's financial systems, started by pocketing small amounts from the cash register, no more than $50 at a time. She meticulously altered the daily reports, adjusting inventory numbers and falsifying receipts to cover her tracks. Each time she handed the stolen money to Lachlan, she felt a piece of her soul crumble away. Lachlan, for his part, treated the whole affair with a chilling detachment. He set up a separate bank account to deposit the stolen funds, careful to keep the transactions below amounts that might trigger suspicion. To the outside world, he played the role of the doting fiancé, but in private, he was cold and demanding, constantly pressing Zara for more. As weeks turned into months, the amounts grew larger. Lachlan's appetite for money seemed insatiable, and Zara found herself taking greater risks to meet his demands. She began to manipulate the payroll, creating ghost employees and diverting their salaries. She falsified supplier invoices, pocketing the difference between the actual and inflated costs. The stress of maintaining the deception took its toll on Zara. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from sleepless nights spent agonizing over her actions. Her once bubbly personality became subdued, her passion for cooking diminishing, as the kitchen she once loved became a constant reminder of her betrayal. Lachlan, however, thrived. The influx of cash allowed him to pay off his gambling debts and even start making risky investments in the stock market. He began to dress better, drive a newer car, and talk about purchasing a house, all under the guise of planning for their future together. As the wedding date approached, Zara found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The thought of marrying Lachlan filled her with dread, but she saw no way out. She had committed crimes, betrayed not only her fiancé but also Enzo and the restaurant that had given her a chance. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making each day a struggle to maintain the facade of normality. Little did Zara know that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to come tumbling down. Enzo, sharp-eyed and attentive to his business, had begun to notice discrepancies in the books. The confrontation that was brewing would set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Enzo Rossi had built his restaurant empire on attention to detail, and it was this meticulous nature that first alerted him to the problem. Small inconsistencies in the daily reports, slight discrepancies in the inventory. Individually, they were easy to overlook, but collectively, they painted a troubling picture. At first, Enzo attributed the errors to simple mistakes or software glitches. He spent long nights poring over spreadsheets, trying to reconcile the numbers. But as the discrepancies continued to mount, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Someone was stealing from him, and given the nature of the manipulations, it had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the restaurant's operations. His suspicions inevitably turned to Zara. She had access to all the systems, and the changes had begun around the time their affair started. The thought that she might be betraying him professionally as well as personally was almost too much to bear. Enzo chose a quiet afternoon to confront Zara, calling her into his office under the pretense of discussing a new menu. As soon as the door closed behind her, the facade dropped. He laid out the evidence he had gathered, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Zara's world seemed to crumble around her. Caught between her loyalty to Enzo and her fear of Lachlan, she broke down, confessing everything through a flood of tears. She told Enzo about Lachlan's discovery of their affair, the blackmail, and the escalating demands for money. Enzo listened in stunned silence, a maelstrom of emotions raging within him. Anger at the betrayal warred with concern for Zara, and fear for his own reputation. The revelation of the theft was bad enough, but if word of their affair got out, it would destroy not only his marriage, but also the carefully cultivated image he had built in the community. In the end, self-preservation won out. Enzo made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He wouldn't go to the police. The risk of exposure was too great. Instead, he would handle this internally. He demanded that Zara end things with Lachlan immediately and return every cent that had been stolen. In return, he would keep quiet about her crimes. What Enzo didn't realize was that his decision to keep the police out of it would set in motion a dangerous chain of events. Lachlan, already teetering on the edge of desperation, would not take kindly to having his source of money cut off. And Zara, caught between two men and her own guilt, was a ticking time bomb of emotions. As Zara left Enzo's office, both of them believed they had found a solution. In reality, they had merely set the stage for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. In the days following her confrontation with Enzo, Zara felt as if she were walking on a tightrope, constantly on the verge of losing her balance. She knew she had to end things with Lachlan, but the thought filled her with dread. Lachlan had already shown how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted, and she feared his reaction to being cut off. Lachlan, oblivious to the shift in dynamics, continued to press Zara for more money. His demands had become increasingly erratic. Fueled by early success in his stock market gambles, he talked of quitting his job, of investing full-time, painting pictures of a lavish future that made Zara's stomach churn with anxiety. When Zara finally gathered the courage to confront Lachlan, the conversation quickly spiraled out of control. She told him about Enzo's discovery, her voice shaking as she explained that there would be no more money. Lachlan's reaction was explosive. He raged at her, accusing her of choosing Enzo over him, threatening to expose their affair and her theft to the entire town. In a moment of desperation, Zara blurted out that Enzo already knew about the affair, that he had chosen to keep it quiet to protect his own reputation. It was the wrong thing to say. Lachlan's anger transformed into a cold, calculating fury. If Enzo was willing to cover up the theft to hide the affair, Lachlan reasoned, then perhaps there was still a way to profit from the situation. Over the next few days, Lachlan began to formulate a new plan. He started showing up at the restaurant during busy hours, making vague comments within earshot of staff and customers. He sent anonymous letters to Vivian, hinting at her husband's infidelity without providing concrete details. Each move was designed to ratchet up the pressure on Enzo, to push him towards a breaking point. Zara watched this unfolding disaster with a sense of helpless dread. She tried to warn Enzo, but he was already retreating into himself, becoming paranoid and short-tempered. The once bustling kitchen of the restaurant became a pressure cooker of tension, with staff picking up on the strained atmosphere between Enzo and Zara. As Lachlan's actions became bolder, Enzo's grip on the situation began to slip. He started drinking heavily, making careless mistakes in the kitchen. Vivian, picking up on the whispers and her husband's strange behavior, became increasingly suspicious and confrontational. The carefully constructed lives of all involved were unraveling at an alarming rate. It was clear that something had to give, but no one could have predicted the violent culmination that was about to unfold in the very place where it all began, the kitchen of the restaurant. Tonight that changed everything started like any other at the restaurant. The dining room hummed with the chatter of patrons, the clink of cutlery against fine china, and the soft strains of Italian music. But in the kitchen, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. Enzo had been drinking since the afternoon, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as he barked orders at his staff. Zara worked silently at her station, her eyes constantly darting to the door, dreading Lachlan's now nightly appearance to taunt them. It was just past 9 when Lachlan pushed through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with a dangerous combination of alcohol and bravado. "Enzo, you and I need to have a chat," he announced loudly, causing several of the kitchen staff to pause in their work. Enzo, his patience already worn thin, gestured sharply for Lachlan to follow him into the small office adjacent to the kitchen. Zara, her heart pounding, trailed after them, determined to prevent the confrontation she had been fearing. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting and accusations. Lachlan, emboldened by drink, laid out his demands, a substantial sum of money in exchange for his silence. Enzo, equally inebriated, refused, his face purpling with rage as he yelled at Lachlan to get out of his restaurant. Zara tried to intervene, pleading with both men to calm down, to think rationally. But her words fell on deaf ears. The situation escalated rapidly, with Lachlan grabbing a knife from a nearby prep table, and Enzo lunging for the gun he kept hidden in his desk drawer for emergencies. What happened next would be debated in the courts for months to come. In the chaos of the moment, with Zara screaming for them to stop, a shot rang out. The bullet, whether by intent or accident, struck Lachlan in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of shock on his face, before crumpling to the floor. The kitchen erupted into pandemonium. Staff members rushed in, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Someone called for an ambulance, while others tried to stem the flow of blood from Lachlan's wound. Enzo stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, as the full impact of what had just occurred washed over him. Zara, in a state of shock, found herself mechanically reciting the events to the police officers who arrived on the scene. She watched as Lachlan was stretchered out, his fate uncertain, and as Enzo was led away in handcuffs, still protesting that it had been self-defense. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the weight of her role in the tragedy began to sink in. Her affair with Enzo, her agreement to Lachlan's blackmail scheme, her failure to come clean earlier, all of it had led to this moment. The life she had carefully built in Millhaven lay in ruins around her, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The shot fired in the kitchen of the restaurant that night echoed far beyond its walls, setting in motion a series of events that would captivate and horrify the small coastal town for years to come. In the days following the shooting, Millhaven found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. News vans lined the streets, reporters eager for any morsel of information about the tragedy that had unfolded in the town's beloved Italian restaurant. The investigation moved quickly, with detectives piecing together the complex web of relationships and motivations that had led to that fateful night. Zara, racked with guilt and exhaustion, provided a full confession, detailing the affair, the blackmail, and the theft. Her cooperation proved crucial in unraveling the full extent of the situation. Lachlan, having survived the initial shooting, clung to life in the intensive care unit of Millhaven General Hospital. As he recovered, he too began to talk, his version of events largely corroborating Zara's account, though colored by his own perspective of victimhood. Enzo, initially held on attempted murder charges, maintained his claim of self-defense. The discovery of the knife near where Lachlan had fallen lent some credence to his story, but the circumstances surrounding the confrontation complicated matters. As the details of the case became public, the town reeled from the revelations. The image of the restaurant as a charming family restaurant was shattered, replaced by lurid tales of adultery and financial crimes. Vivian, devastated by her husband's infidelity and the public humiliation, filed for divorce and resigned from her position on the town council. The employees of the restaurant found themselves suddenly out of work, as the restaurant was closed indefinitely, its future uncertain. Many in the town felt betrayed, their trust in people they had considered pillars of the community irreparably damaged. As the case moved towards trial, plea negotiations began behind the scenes. Prosecutors, aware of the complexities of the case and the potential for a lengthy, sensational trial, were open to deals that would avoid a public spectacle. Zara, advised by her lawyer and hoping to avoid a harsh sentence, agreed to testify against both Lachlan and Enzo in exchange for leniency. Lachlan, facing charges of extortion and conspiracy, sought a similar arrangement, eager to paint himself as a victim of circumstance rather than an instigator. Enzo, however, remained adamant about his innocence, insisting on his right to a trial. His defense team began to construct a narrative of a hard-working businessman driven to desperate measures by threats and blackmail. As the legal machinery ground forward, the residents of Millhaven were left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy. Trust had been broken, reputations shattered, and the very fabric of the community tested. The true cost of the events at the restaurant, it seemed, would be paid not just by those directly involved, but by the entire town. The jury, while sympathetic to the pressures he had faced, couldn't overlook the fact that he had escalated the confrontation by producing a gun. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Zara Callahan, in exchange for her testimony and full cooperation, received a suspended sentence and probation for her role in the embezzlement scheme. The judge, taking into account her remorse and the coercion she had faced, opted for leniency. However, her career in the culinary world was effectively over, her reputation irreparably tarnished. Lachlan Thorne, who survived the shooting but was left with permanent injuries, pleaded guilty to extortion and blackmail charges. He received a 5-year prison sentence, with the judge noting the calculated nature of his actions and the devastating consequences they had wrought. The restaurant never reopened its doors. The building stood empty for years, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. At the heart of this story are 2 couples. Isabella and Russell Hawthorne, both in their early 50s, had been fixtures of the community for over 2 decades. They were the couple everyone looked up to. Successful, well-respected, and seemingly happily married, their home was often the center of neighborhood gatherings. Just 3 houses down, the newly wedded Zara and Eric Donovan had recently moved in. Both in their mid-20s, they brought a youthful energy to the street that had long been dominated by older families and retirees. Their arrival was met with curiosity and warmth by their neighbors, particularly the Hawthorns. Little did anyone know that the lives of these 4 individuals would soon become entangled in a web of desire, obsession, and murder. What began as a daring experiment in sexual exploration would spiral into a nightmare that would leave 1 dead, 1 behind bars, and 2 others grappling with the consequences of their choices. This is the story of how a seemingly innocent proposition led to a brutal crime that would be splashed across national headlines and forever change the lives of those involved. It's a cautionary tale of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary-seeming individuals and the devastating consequences of stepping outside societal norms. Isabella Hawthorne had always been the golden girl. Growing up in Seattle, she was the captain of her high school cheerleading squad, prom queen and valedictorian. But Isabella was more than just a pretty face. She had a sharp mind and boundless ambition. She met Russell Hawthorne during her sophomore year at the University of Washington. Russell, 2 years her senior, was the star quarterback with a bright future ahead of him. Their courtship was the stuff of campus legend, the perfect couple that everyone envied. They married shortly after Isabella's graduation, with dreams of conquering the world together. Russell's promising football career was cut short by a knee injury in his first year as a professional player. He pivoted to sports management, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. Isabella, meanwhile, pursued a career in marketing, her creativity and drive making her a rising star in the field. Their move coincided with the birth of their daughter, Lily. They threw themselves into parenthood and their careers with equal fervor. From the outside, they seemed to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a loving family. But as the years went by, cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. Russell's work kept him away from home for longer stretches, and he began to put on weight, losing the athletic physique that had first attracted Isabella. For her part, Isabella found herself increasingly restless. With Lily away at college, the house felt empty, and her job no longer provided the satisfaction it once did. Isabella began to wonder if this was all there was to life. She started yoga classes and joined a book club, searching for something to fill the growing void she felt. She found herself envying the young couples she saw, with their passionate embraces and carefree laughter. When was the last time she and Russell had shared such moments? Russell, oblivious to his wife's discontent, continued his routine of long hours at the office, followed by evenings in front of the TV with a beer in hand. Their conversations became perfunctory, limited to discussions about bills, home maintenance, and occasional updates about Lily. As her 50th birthday approached, Isabella felt a growing sense of panic. Was this how she would spend the rest of her life? The woman who had once been voted most likely to succeed now felt trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. It was in this state of mind that Isabella first laid eyes on Eric Donovan. Young, handsome, with a lean swimmer's build, Eric represented everything that was missing from Isabella's life: excitement, passion, and the promise of adventure. For the first time in years, Isabella felt a stirring of desire. As she watched Eric and his young wife Zara move into the neighborhood, an idea began to form in her mind. An idea that would change everything. Zara Donovan, born Zara Khalil, was the daughter of Lebanese immigrants who had settled in Portland 2 decades earlier. Growing up, she had always felt caught between two worlds: the traditional values of her parents and the liberal, free-spirited culture of the Pacific Northwest. With her olive skin, Zara stood out in a city that was predominantly white. From a young age, Zara showed a passion for art. Her parents, while supportive, always emphasized the importance of a practical career. As a compromise, Zara studied graphic design at Portland State University, finding a way to merge her creative instincts with a marketable skill. It was during her final year at PSU that Zara met Eric Donovan. She was working on her thesis project at a local coffee shop when Eric, a barista there, struck up a conversation about her sketches. Eric, with his easy charm and boyish good looks, immediately captured Zara's attention. Eric had grown up in a small town in rural Oregon, the youngest of 4 boys in a working-class family. He'd moved to Portland 3 years earlier, drawn by the city's vibrant art scene and progressive culture. While he worked as a barista to pay the bills, his true passion was photography. His Instagram account, filled with moody black and white portraits in stark urban landscapes, had a modest but growing following. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within weeks of their first meeting, Eric and Zara were inseparable. They spent their days exploring Portland's hidden gems, secret gardens, underground art galleries, hole-in-the-wall music venues. Eric introduced Zara to urban exploration, and she in turn taught him about Lebanese cuisine and culture. To Zara, Eric represented freedom and self-expression. He encouraged her to pursue her art without compromise, to break free from the expectations of her family and society. With Eric, Zara felt seen and understood in a way she never had before. For Eric, Zara was his muse and his anchor. Her quiet strength and unwavering support gave him the confidence to pursue his photography more seriously. He began to book small gigs, weddings, local band promotional shots, even a few magazine spreads. Their decision to get married came as a surprise to many who knew them. Both sets of parents expressed concern about the speed of their relationship, but Eric and Zara were convinced they had found their soulmates. They had a small ceremony in a sculpture garden, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The move was a practical decision. As freelancers, they needed a space that could serve as both home and studio. The quiet suburb offered affordable housing, close enough to the city for work opportunities. They saw it as the perfect place to start their life together, envisioning lazy Sunday mornings in their backyard and cozy evenings planning their future. Little did they know that their new neighborhood held secrets and temptations that would test the strength of their young love. As they unpacked boxes in their new home, neither Eric nor Zara could have imagined the turmoil that lay ahead, or the devastating consequences their choices would have. The annual summer block party was a tradition that dated back decades. Every year on the last Saturday of August, Sycamore Lane would transform into a bustling fairground of sorts. Neighbors would bring out grills, coolers full of drinks, and folding tables laden with potluck dishes. Children would run around with water guns and bubble wands, while adults caught up on neighborhood gossip and sipped cold beers. This year's party held a special significance for the residents of Sycamore Lane. It was the official welcome for the Donovans, the street's newest additions. Isabella Hawthorne, as the unofficial social director of the neighborhood, had taken it upon herself to ensure that Zara and Eric felt welcomed. As the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the street, Isabella made her way to the Donovans, who were standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. "Isabella, you look lovely," Russell called out as she walked past, her sundress floating around her legs. She flashed him a smile, but her eyes were already fixed on Eric. "Eric and Zara, welcome to the neighborhood," Isabella said warmly, air-kissing Zara's cheeks and letting her hand linger perhaps a moment too long on Eric's arm. "We're so glad you could join us." The conversation flowed easily, lubricated by the fruity sangria Isabella had brought along. Zara found herself drawn into a discussion about local art galleries with some of the other neighbors, while Eric and Isabella drifted towards the Hawthorns' front yard. "You have a beautiful home," Eric commented, his eyes roving over the house. Isabella beamed with pride. "Why, thank you," she replied. "You should see the inside. We recently renovated the master bathroom. Perhaps I could give you a tour sometime. Get you some ideas for your own place?" The flirtatious undertone in Isabella's voice was unmistakable. Eric, slightly taken aback but not displeased, felt a flush creep up his neck. Before he could respond, Russell appeared, clapping a hand on Eric's shoulder. "Hope my wife isn't talking your ear off, son." Russell chuckled. Isabella shot him a look that mixed annoyance and affection. "Actually, she was just offering to show me your renovation," Eric said, his voice slightly strained. As the evening wore on, the two couples found themselves gravitating towards each other. Zara, charmed by Russell's dad jokes and genuine interest in her artwork, found herself relaxing for the first time since moving in. Isabella, meanwhile, hung on Eric's every word as he described his photography projects. By the time the party wound down, seeds had been planted. Seeds of attraction, curiosity, and temptation that would soon grow into something none of them could have anticipated. It was a week after the block party that Isabella first broached the subject with Russell. They were in bed, the TV droning in the background, when Isabella turned to her husband with a mischievous glint in her eye. Isabella broached the subject with Russell one night as they lay in bed. Her voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent of excitement as she asked if he had ever considered spicing up their love life. Russell, half asleep, mumbled incoherently at first. Isabella pressed on, clarifying that she meant specifically in the bedroom. This caught Russell's attention and he became suddenly alert. Cautiously, Russell asked what exactly she had in mind. Isabella took a deep breath before suggesting they try swapping partners with another couple. The silence that followed her proposal was deafening. Russell stared at his wife, trying to determine if she was serious. As he realized she was, a mix of emotions played across his face: shock, intrigue, and a hint of arousal. Over the next few days, the Hawthorns had numerous discussions about Isabella's proposition. Russell, initially hesitant, found himself warming to the idea. The thought of being with a younger woman stirred something in him he thought had long since died. It was Isabella who finally suggested the Donovans. "They're young, attractive, and new to the area," she reasoned. "They might be open to something like this." Approaching the younger couple proved to be a delicate matter. It was at a neighborhood barbecue that Isabella, emboldened by several glasses of wine, pulled Zara aside. The conversation was awkward at first, with Isabella dancing around the subject, but once the proposition was laid out, Zara's reaction surprised her. Instead of outrage or disgust, there was curiosity in the younger woman's eyes. The evening of the swap arrived with a mix of nervous energy and anticipation. The Hawthorns had suggested using their home, citing their finished basement as a perfect, private setting. As Zara and Eric walked up the driveway hand in hand, Zara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Are we really doing this?" He squeezed her hand reassuringly, but she could see the apprehension in his eyes as well. Isabella greeted them at the door, her smile a little too bright, her laugh a little too loud. The forced casualness of the situation was palpable as they made small talk over glasses of expensive red wine. Russell busied himself with the stereo, filling the room with soft jazz in an attempt to ease the tension. After what seemed like an eternity of awkward conversation, Isabella finally stood up. "So," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "shall we?" They had agreed beforehand on the pairings, Isabella with Eric, Russell with Zara. As they split off, Zara couldn't help but glance back at Eric, a moment of uncertainty passing between them. But then Eric disappeared down the hallway with Isabella, and Zara found herself alone with Russell. Russell led Zara to the guest bedroom, his hand gentle on the small of her back. Despite his earlier bravado, he felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. It had been years since he'd been with anyone other than Isabella. Zara, sensing his hesitation, took the initiative. She reached up and kissed him softly, then more passionately. Russell responded, his hands exploring her young, firm body with growing confidence. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Isabella was living out the fantasies she'd been harboring since she first laid eyes on Eric. His youthful energy and enthusiasm more than made up for any lack of experience. Isabella felt desired, beautiful, alive in a way she hadn't in years. Eric, for his part, was intoxicated by Isabella's confidence and sensuality. As the encounters reached their climax, a series of emotions washed over each participant: excitement, pleasure, guilt, and an unexpected emptiness all mingled together in a confusing cocktail. Afterwards, as they all reconvened in the living room, an awkward silence fell over the group. The reality of what they had done seemed to hit them all at once. Zara couldn't meet Eric's eyes, focusing instead on smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. Russell cleared his throat several times, but couldn't seem to find any words. Only Isabella seemed truly at ease, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was Eric who finally broke the silence. "Well," he said, his attempt at a casual tone falling flat. That was something. The tension broke and nervous laughter filled the room. They made stilted small talk for a few more minutes before the Donovans made their excuses and left. As Zara and Eric walked home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They were unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their relationships. Back in the Hawthorne house, Isabella hummed to herself as she cleaned up, already thinking about the next time. Russell watched her, a nagging feeling of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. None of them realized that this night was just the beginning, the first step down a path that would lead to obsession, betrayal, and ultimately, tragedy. In the days following the swap, life seemed to return to normal, but beneath the surface, changes were brewing, particularly in Eric Donovan. Eric found himself unable to stop thinking about Isabella. The encounter had awakened something in him, a hunger he'd never experienced before. He began to find excuses to be outside when he knew Isabella would be leaving for work. He'd wave, trying to appear casual, but his eyes would linger on her long after she'd driven away. Zara noticed the change in her husband almost immediately. Eric seemed distracted, often lost in thought. When she tried to initiate intimacy, he was either too tired or not in the mood. Their once passionate lovemaking became infrequent and mechanical. One afternoon, Zara came home early from a client meeting to find Eric's photography workspace in disarray. As she began to tidy up, she noticed something odd. Hidden beneath a stack of prints was a folder filled with photos of Isabella. Some were clearly taken from a distance, capturing Isabella gardening, getting her mail, or walking to her car. Others were more intimate, zoomed-in shots through windows, Isabella in various states of undress. Zara felt her stomach churn. This wasn't just a harmless crush or the after-effects of their encounter. This was something much more sinister. Meanwhile, Isabella had begun to notice Eric's increased presence in her daily life. At first, she was flattered by the attention, even reciprocating with flirtatious glances and accidental touches when they'd run into each other. But as the days wore on, Eric's behavior became more erratic and intense. He began sending her messages at all hours, alternating between passionate declarations of love and angry accusations. When she didn't respond quickly enough, Isabella tried to let him down gently, explaining that their encounter was a one-time thing, but Eric refused to accept it. One night, Isabella woke to the sound of something hitting her bedroom window. Peering out, she saw Eric standing in her front yard, a handful of pebbles in his hand. His eyes, wild and unfocused, locked onto hers. "I can't live without you, Isabella," he called out, his voice breaking. "We're meant to be together." Isabella quickly closed the curtains, her heart racing. She woke Russell, who grumbled as he went to confront Eric. By the time Russell made it outside, Eric had disappeared into the night, leaving only a crumpled bouquet of flowers on the front step. As Isabella lay awake that night, she realized with growing horror that her exciting sexual experiment had unleashed something dark and dangerous. She had no idea how right she was, or how tragic the consequences would be. Over the next few weeks, Eric's behavior spiraled further out of control. His obsession with Isabella consumed every aspect of his life. He neglected his photography business, spending hours stalking Isabella's social media accounts and driving by her house. Zara watched helplessly as her husband transformed into someone she barely recognized. Isabella, for her part, vacillated between fear and a perverse excitement. Part of her was terrified of Eric's growing instability, but another part, a part she was ashamed to admit existed, was thrilled by his obsessive attention. It made her feel desirable, powerful in a way she hadn't in years. The situation came to a head one afternoon, when Isabella returned home to find Eric sitting in her living room. "How did you get in here?" she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Eric smiled, a cold, unsettling expression that sent chills down Isabella's spine. "You gave me a key, remember? For watering the plants when you were on vacation." Isabella's mind raced. That had been months ago, before the swap, before everything had gone wrong. She should have asked for it back. Why hadn't she asked for it back? Eric stood, moving towards her with predatory grace. "We need to talk, Isabella," he said, his voice low and intense. "About us, about our future together." Isabella backed away, fumbling for her phone. "There is no us, Eric," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to leave." But Eric kept advancing, his eyes wild with a mixture of love and madness. "You don't mean that," he insisted. "I know you feel what I feel. We're destined to be together, Isabella. I won't let anyone come between us." As Eric reached for her, Isabella let out a scream. The sound seemed to snap Eric out of his trance. He blinked, looking around as if seeing the room for the first time. Without another word, he brushed past Isabella and out the front door. Shaking, Isabella collapsed onto the couch. She knew she should call the police, but what would she say? That she'd willingly slept with her young neighbor, and now he was stalking her. The thought of the scandal, of everyone knowing what she'd done, was unbearable. Little did Isabella know, her silence would have devastating consequences. For in his twisted mind, Eric took her failure to report him as a sign of her secret love, and he was determined to eliminate any obstacles standing in their way, no matter the cost. The tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Isabella was alone in her house, Russell having left for a golf game with friends. She was in the kitchen, mindlessly flipping through a magazine when she heard the back door open. Isabella called out with a trembling voice, asking if it was Eric. There was no response, only the sound of footsteps moving through the house. Her heart racing, Isabella grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it out in front of her like a shield. When Eric appeared in the doorway, his eyes were glazed and unfocused, and he reeked of alcohol. He slurred that he had seen Russell drive away, declaring that now they could be together as they were supposed to be. Isabella pleaded with Eric, telling him he needed help and that this wasn't right, but she couldn't finish her sentence. Eric wasn't listening. He lunged forward, trying to grab Isabella. She shrieked and swung the knife wildly, connecting with Eric's arm and drawing blood. The sight of his own blood seemed to enrage Eric further. He roared and insulted her and charged again. In the ensuing struggle, the knife clattered to the floor. Eric's hands found Isabella's throat, squeezing with terrifying strength. Isabella clawed at his face, gasping for air as her vision began to darken around the edges. In desperation, she brought her knee up sharply, connecting with Eric's groin. The blow caused him to double over in pain, releasing his grip on her throat. Isabella scrambled away, her fingers closing around the handle of the fallen knife. As Eric straightened up, his face contorted with rage, Isabella acted on pure instinct. She thrust the knife forward, feeling it sink into Eric's chest. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Eric looked down at the knife protruding from his body, a look of surprise replacing the anger on his face. Then slowly he crumpled to the floor. Isabella stared at Eric's still form, the reality of what she'd done crashing over her. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. The quiet of the community was shattered by the wail of sirens as police cars and an ambulance converged on the Hawthorne residence. Neighbors poured out onto their front lawns, watching in shock as paramedics rushed into the house, only to emerge shortly after, shaking their heads grimly. Detective Liam Reeves, a veteran of the Portland Police Department, arrived on the scene to find a distraught Isabella Hawthorne being questioned by officers. Her hands and clothes were stained with blood, her eyes wild with shock and fear. As Reeves approached, he overheard snippets of Isabella's statement. She was saying that Eric had attacked her, that she had no choice, and expressing shock and disbelief at what she had done. Reeves took charge of the scene, ordering a thorough search of the house and surrounding area, while crime scene technicians combed through the kitchen, photographing the bloody knife and the signs of struggle. Reeves turned his attention to the neighbors. Zara Donovan stood at the edge of the police tape, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Reeves approached her gently, introducing himself as Detective Reeves and confirming that the victim was her husband. Zara nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face. When Reeves pressed her about when she had last seen Eric, Zara managed to choke out that it had been that morning. She explained that Eric had said he was going for a walk, but her voice trailed off as she struggled to process the situation. Unable to continue, she broke down sobbing. Reeves made a note in his pad before moving on to question other neighbors. As he gathered more information, a story began to emerge of a quiet neighborhood rocked by an unthinkable crime. As the body of Eric Donovan was wheeled out on a gurney, covered by a sheet, Reeves couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this case than a simple home invasion gone wrong. The look in Isabella Hawthorne's eyes, a mixture of relief and guilt, told him that unraveling the truth would be a complex and delicate process. In the days following Eric's death, Detective Reeves dove deep into the lives of both the Hawthornes and the Donovans. What he uncovered was a tangled web of secrets and lies that painted a very different picture from the initial reports of a random break-in. Interviews with neighbors revealed whispers of an illicit affair between Isabella and Eric. Cell phone records showed an overwhelming number of calls and messages from Eric to Isabella in the weeks leading up to the incident, many of which had gone unanswered. But it was the discovery of Eric's photography studio that blew the case wide open. Hidden among his professional equipment, detectives found a camera with a high-powered zoom lens and memory cards filled with hundreds of photos of Isabella, many taken without her knowledge. When confronted with this evidence, Zara broke down. Through tears, she revealed the truth about the partner swap and the subsequent obsession that had gripped her husband. She spoke of Eric's erratic behavior, his neglect of their marriage, and her own fears about his mental state. Isabella, faced with the mounting evidence, finally confessed to the full story. She admitted to the affair and the stalking, but maintained that the final confrontation had been self-defense. Russell, devastated by his wife's infidelity, nonetheless stood by her side throughout the ordeal. As Reeves pieced together the events that led to that fatal Sunday afternoon, he was struck by the tragedy of it all. What had begun as a misguided attempt to spice up a stagnant marriage had spiraled into an obsession that cost a young man his life and forever changed the lives of all involved. The case, once thought to be a straightforward home invasion, was now revealed to be a complex tale of desire, betrayal, and deadly obsession. The prosecution painted Isabella as a bored housewife who initiated an affair with a younger man, then killed him to keep her indiscretion secret. They emphasized the premeditated nature of her actions, pointing to the convenient absence of her husband on the day of the killing. The defense, led by high-profile attorney Simone Jeffries, argued passionately that Isabella was a victim of stalking and harassment who acted in self-defense. They presented evidence of Eric's obsessive behavior and called expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of stalking on victims. Zara's testimony proved to be a turning point in the trial. Her emotional account of Eric's descent into obsession and her own fear for Isabella's safety swayed many jurors. "She's not the monster they're making her out to be," Zara said through tears. "Eric, he wasn't himself at the end. What happened is a tragedy, but Isabella was as much a victim as anyone." In his closing arguments, the prosecutor urged the jury not to be swayed by emotion. "The facts are clear," he insisted. "Mrs. Hawthorne made a series of choices that led to this tragic outcome. She must be held accountable." Simone Jeffries, in her rebuttal, appealed to the jury's sense of empathy. "Put yourself in Isabella's shoes," she implored. Terrified, alone, confronted by a man who had been stalking her for weeks, she did what anyone would do. She fought for her life. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. The fate of Isabella Hawthorne and the final judgment on this suburban tragedy now rested in their hands. Isabella Hawthorne was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. As Isabella was led away from the courtroom, the impact of the tragedy on all involved was palpable. Russell Hawthorne, his face haggard from the stress of the trial, watched his wife disappear through the courtroom doors. Despite the revelations of her infidelity, he had stood by her throughout the ordeal. Now he faced the prospect of years alone, grappling with the consequences of their ill-fated experiment. Zara Donovan, widowed and alone, retreated from public life. The trauma of losing Eric and the public exposure of their private lives left deep scars. She threw herself into her art, producing a series of haunting paintings that would later be hailed as a powerful exploration of grief and betrayal. The residents struggled to come to terms with the events that had shattered their peaceful community. The Hawthorne and Donovan houses stood empty, constant reminders of the tragedy that had unfolded. Some neighbors moved away, unable to bear the memories. Those who stayed found their trust in one another irrevocably altered. Born Madison Marie on April 3, 1985, Madison's childhood was steeped in the idyllic charm of small-town America. Her parents raised her with a blend of love, discipline, and appreciation for the arts. From an early age, Madison displayed a voracious appetite for literature. Her parents nurtured this passion, filling their modest home with books and encouraging Madison's academic pursuits. As she blossomed into a teenager, Madison's intelligence and beauty made her a popular figure at Pine Haven High School, though she often preferred the company of books to that of her peers. It was during her senior year that Madison met Caspian Elwyn, a charismatic transfer student with dreams of becoming a journalist. Caspian's quick wit and shared love of literature quickly captured Madison's heart. Their whirlwind romance became the talk of the town, with many predicting a bright future for the young couple. After graduating high school, Madison and Caspian both attended the University of Oregon. Madison pursued a degree in library science, while Caspian studied journalism. Their college years were marked by late-night study sessions, passionate debates about literature, and dreams of a life filled with adventure and intellectual pursuits. Upon graduation, the couple returned to Pine Haven. Madison secured a position at the local library, quickly working her way up to head librarian. Caspian, however, struggled to find fulfilling work in the small town. His dreams of becoming an investigative journalist seemed increasingly out of reach in the quiet confines of Pine Haven. On a crisp autumn day, Madison and Caspian exchanged vows in a picturesque ceremony at the Pine Haven Community Church. The entire town turned out to celebrate the union of two of its brightest young stars. For a time, it seemed that Madison had achieved the perfect life, a fulfilling career, a loving husband, and the respect of her community. But as the years passed, cracks began to appear in the facade of their perfect marriage. Caspian grew restless and resentful, feeling trapped in Pine Haven. Madison, devoted to her work in her hometown, couldn't understand his discontent. The couple's once vibrant conversations devolved into tense silences and bitter arguments. Little did Madison know that this first taste of marital discord was merely a prelude to the turmoil that lay ahead. The unraveling of Madison and Caspian's marriage was a slow, painful process that played out over the course of 2 years. Caspian's frustration with small-town life and his unfulfilled ambitions led him to become increasingly withdrawn and irritable. He began spending more time at the local bar, drowning his sorrows and lamenting his unrealized dreams to anyone who would listen. Madison, for her part, threw herself into her work at the library, organizing reading programs for children and spearheading a digital archiving project for the town's historical documents. She clung to the hope that if she could just make their life in Pine Haven perfect enough, Caspian would rediscover his love for her and their shared life. The breaking point came in the spring of 2013, when Caspian announced that he had accepted a junior reporter position at a small newspaper in Seattle. He delivered this news not with excitement, but with a sense of grim finality. "Madison, we're done here. I can't do this anymore. I'm suffocating in this town and I won't let it kill my dreams." Madison was devastated. She pleaded with Caspian to reconsider, to give their marriage another chance, but his mind was made up. Within a week, he had packed his belongings and left Pine Haven, leaving Madison alone in the house they had once hoped to fill with children and laughter. The divorce proceedings were mercifully quick, but the emotional toll on Madison was immense. She retreated into herself, finding solace in her books and her work. The once vivacious woman became a shadow of her former self, her smile now tinged with sadness, her eyes carrying the weight of her heartbreak. For 2 years, Madison lived in a state of emotional limbo, going through the motions of her daily life while nursing the wounds of her failed marriage. Little did she know that fate was about to deal her another hand, one that would lead her down a path she could never have imagined. It was on a rain-soaked Tuesday in April 2015 that Silas Qualley first walked into the Pine Haven Public Library. With his tall frame, Silas cut an impressive figure. He approached Madison's desk with a warm smile, introducing himself as the new high school English teacher. Silas had recently moved to Pine Haven from Portland, seeking a change of pace after the end of his own long-term relationship. As he and Madison began to discuss their shared love of literature, a spark of connection ignited between them. For the first time in years, Madison felt the flutter of excitement in her chest. Over the following weeks, Silas became a regular at the library, often staying until closing time to chat with Madison. Their conversations ranged from passionate debates about the merits of various authors to quiet confidences about their past relationships and hopes for the future. Silas's gentle humor and obvious admiration began to chip away at the walls Madison had built around her heart. The whirlwind romance that followed was the talk of the town. Madison bloomed under Silas's attention, regaining the vibrancy that had dimmed during her years with Caspian. Silas, for his part, seemed utterly devoted to Madison, showering her with affection and romantic gestures. Just 6 months after their first meeting, Silas proposed on the very same spot in the park where they had their first date. Madison, caught up in the intoxicating rush of new love, accepted without hesitation. The couple married in a small, intimate ceremony at the Pinehaven Botanical Gardens, with Madison's parents and a handful of close friends in attendance. As Madison and Silas exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for better or worse, neither could have foreseen the storms that lay ahead. For Madison, it seemed that life had given her a second chance at happiness, but fate, as she would learn, had other plans. The first 2 years of Madison and Silas's marriage seemed to be plucked from the pages of a romance novel. They settled into a charming home on Maple Street, just a short walk from both the library and the high school. Weekends were filled with antiquing trips to neighboring towns, cozy evenings spent reading aloud to each other, and dinner parties with their growing circle of friends. Silas quickly became a beloved figure at Pinehaven High School, his innovative teaching methods and genuine interest in his students earning him the admiration of both pupils and parents alike. Madison beamed with pride whenever she heard people praising her husband's dedication and charm. At home, Silas was attentive and affectionate. He surprised Madison with breakfast in bed on Sunday mornings, left little love notes in her lunch bag, and never failed to ask about her day. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect couple, a shining example of mature, devoted love. Yet, as the initial glow of their honeymoon phase began to fade, subtle signs of discord started to emerge. Silas began to work later hours, citing the need to prepare for his classes and grade papers. While Madison initially accepted this as part of his commitment to his job, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of loneliness on the nights when she ate dinner alone. There were other small changes, too. Silas became more protective of his phone, often taking calls in another room or quickly putting it away when Madison entered. He started going to the gym more frequently, paying increased attention to his appearance. When Madison commented on these changes, Silas brushed off her concerns with a laugh and a kiss. Despite these niggling doubts, Madison was determined to believe in the strength of their relationship. She threw herself into being the perfect wife, planning elaborate date nights and surprising Silas with thoughtful gifts. If she sometimes felt that his responses to her efforts were a bit forced, she pushed those thoughts aside, chalking it up to the natural ebb and flow of married life. As their third wedding anniversary approached, Madison began to plan a special surprise for Silas, a romantic weekend getaway to the Oregon coast. Little did she know that this trip would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter her world and push her to the very limits of her sanity. It was at the start of the new school year, just a few weeks before their planned anniversary trip, that Lachlan Frost entered their lives. Lachlan, a new biology teacher at Pinehaven High, arrived from Australia with an easy smile and a laid-back charm that immediately endeared him to both students and faculty. Lachlan stood out in the small town like an exotic bird among sparrows. His Australian accent and penchant for colorful storytelling made him an instant hit in the teacher's lounge. Silas and Lachlan hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of literature and their experiences as relative newcomers to Pinehaven. They began having lunch together regularly, and soon Silas was inviting Lachlan over for dinner or drinks after school. At first, Madison was pleased to see her husband forming a close friendship. Silas had always been more introverted, and she hoped that Lachlan's outgoing nature might help bring him out of his shell. She enjoyed the lively conversations that filled their home when Lachlan visited, and the way Silas seemed more animated in his presence. However, as the weeks passed, Madison began to notice a shift in the dynamics. Silas and Lachlan seemed to share inside jokes that she wasn't privy to. More concerning were the frequent text messages and phone calls between the two men. Silas's phone would buzz constantly with notifications, and he would often step out of the room to take calls from Lachlan, his voice low and intimate. When Madison casually mentioned these observations to Silas, he dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. "Lachlan's just going through a tough time adjusting to life here," he explained. "He needs a friend, that's all." Madison tried to quell the unease growing in the pit of her stomach. She told herself she was being paranoid, that she was projecting her past hurts onto her current relationship. But as Silas and Lachlan's friendship continued to deepen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As autumn leaves began to fall and a chill crept into the air, Madison's suspicions grew like shadows at dusk. The late nights at the office became more frequent, with Silas often not returning home until well after midnight. When she asked about these late hours, his explanations became increasingly vague and defensive. One evening, as Silas slept, Madison's curiosity got the better of her. With trembling hands, she picked up his phone from the nightstand. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. As she scrolled through his messages, her heart sank. The exchanges between Silas and Lachlan were filled with flirtatious banter and thinly veiled innuendos. There were references to secret meetings and passionate encounters that made Madison's cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. Confronted with this evidence the next morning, Silas vehemently denied any wrongdoing. "It's just how mates talk in Australia," he insisted. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each passing day. Madison began to pay closer attention to the way Silas and Lachlan interacted when they were together. She noticed the lingering touches, the meaningful glances, the way their bodies seemed to gravitate towards each other in a room. Little did anyone know that behind Madison's increasingly stoic exterior, a plan was forming, a plan that would lead to a night of irreversible consequences. On a chilly Friday evening in late November, Madison made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Silas had told her he would be working late again, collaborating with Lachlan on their mysterious project. But something in his voice, a slight tremor of anticipation perhaps, set off alarm bells in Madison's mind. After pacing the house for hours, her suspicions gnawing at her like a hungry beast, Madison grabbed her car keys and drove to the high school. The parking lot was empty save for two vehicles, Silas's sleek black sedan and Lachlan's rugged SUV. With her heart pounding, Madison made her way to Silas's classroom. As she approached, she heard muffled voices and what sounded like laughter. Steeling herself, she peered through the small window in the door. The scene that greeted her eyes would be forever seared into her memory. Silas and Lachlan were locked in a passionate embrace, their lips meeting in a kiss that left no doubt about the true nature of their relationship. Madison watched, frozen in shock, as her husband's hands roamed Lachlan's body with a familiarity that spoke of long-standing intimacy. For several agonizing minutes, Madison stood there, unable to look away from the tableau of betrayal before her. She watched as Silas and Lachlan broke apart, their faces flushed and eyes bright with desire. She heard snippets of their conversation, words of love and promises of a future together that cut her to the core. Finally, as the reality of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave, Madison stumbled back from the door. She made her way out of the school on unsteady legs, her mind reeling from what she had witnessed. The drive home passed in a blur, tears streaming down her face as she gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. Back at the house, Madison moved as if in a trance. She poured herself a large glass of red wine, draining it in quick, desperate gulps before pouring another. As the alcohol coursed through her system, the initial shock began to give way to a burning rage. As the night wore on, Madison's anger and pain continued to build. She thought about confronting Silas when he returned home, but the idea of facing him, of hearing his excuses and lies, was more than she could bear. Instead, she began to formulate a plan, a way to make Silas and Lachlan pay for the pain they had caused her. Little did Madison know that her actions in the coming hours would not only destroy the lives of Silas and Lachlan, but would also set her on a path from which there would be no return. In the days following her discovery, Madison moved through her life like a ghost, going through the motions of her daily routine, while her mind churned with a toxic mix of grief, rage, and betrayal. She maintained a facade of normalcy, smiling brittle smiles at patrons in the library and exchanging pleasantries with neighbors, all while a storm brewed within her. Silas, oblivious to the fact that his secret had been uncovered, continued his charade of the devoted husband. His attempts at affection now made Madison's skin crawl, each kiss and caress feeling like a fresh betrayal. She found herself studying him when he thought she wasn't looking, searching for signs of the stranger he had become. At night, Madison lay awake, replaying the scene she had witnessed in the classroom over and over in her mind. She imagined confronting Silas, fantasized about exposing his infidelity to the entire town. But something held her back, a combination of shame, fear, and a deep-seated desire for revenge that was slowly taking root in her heart. As the weekend approached, Madison made a decision. She would confront Silas and Lachlan, force them to face the consequences of their actions. What she didn't realize was that this confrontation would spiral out of control in ways she could never have anticipated. Saturday, December 7th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Madison woke early, her head pounding from the previous night's excesses, her heart heavy with the weight of her planned confrontation. As evening approached, Madison put her plan into motion. She told Silas she was going to visit her parents for dinner, knowing full well that he would seize the opportunity to invite Lachlan over. With a kiss on the cheek that felt like acid on her skin, she left the house, driving aimlessly around town for hours as she steeled herself for what was to come. At 9:30 p.m., Madison parked her car a block away from the house and approached on foot. Through the living room window, she could see Silas and Lachlan on the couch, their bodies close, heads bent in intimate conversation. The sight sent a fresh wave of pain and anger coursing through her. Taking a deep breath, Madison entered the house quietly. She could hear Silas and Lachlan's voices drifting from the living room, punctuated by soft laughter. With trembling hands, she reached into her purse and pulled out the small handgun she had taken from her father's collection earlier that week. As she stepped into the living room, time seemed to slow down. Silas and Lachlan looked up, their expressions shifting from surprise to fear as they registered the gun in Madison's hand. Silas stood up slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Madison was beyond talking. Months of pain, betrayal, and pent-up rage exploded out of her in a torrent of accusations and obscenities. She screamed at them, demanding to know how long they had been lying to her, how they could have betrayed her so callously. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but to Madison, it felt like an eternity. As Silas took a step towards her, perhaps intending to disarm her, Madison's finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot caught Silas in the chest, the impact throwing him backward onto the couch. Before she could fully register what she had done, Madison turned the gun on Lachlan, firing twice in rapid succession. The room fell silent, save for the ringing in Madison's ears and the ragged sound of her own breathing. Silas lay motionless on the couch, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Lachlan was slumped on the floor, his eyes open but unseeing. As the reality of what she had done began to sink in, Madison dropped the gun, her legs giving way beneath her. She sank to the floor, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. In a matter of moments, she had destroyed not only the lives of Silas and Lachlan, but her own as well. Outside, a neighbor who had heard the gunshots was already calling 911, setting in motion the final act of this tragic story. The wail of sirens pierced the night air as police cars and ambulances converged on the residence. Neighbors in pajamas and robes gathered on the street, watching in shock as the drama unfolded before them. Madison offered no resistance as the police entered the house, finding her still sitting on the floor of the living room, her vacant gaze fixed on the lifeless bodies of Silas and Lachlan. She was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car, her face a mask of stunned disbelief. As word of the shooting spread through Pinehaven, the town was plunged into a state of collective shock and grief. The community that had once viewed Madison and Silas as the perfect couple now grappled with the violent reality that had shattered that illusion. The investigation into the double homicide was swift and thorough. Forensic teams combed through the home, collecting evidence that would later be presented at trial. Madison's fingerprints on the gun, gunshot residue on her hands, and the testimony of neighbors who had heard the shots left little doubt about her guilt in the physical act of the killings. However, as the case progressed, a more complex picture began to emerge. Interviews with Madison's friends and family painted a portrait of a woman who had been deeply wronged and pushed to her breaking point. The defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Veronica Sloan, began to build a case around temporary insanity and extreme emotional distress. Prosecution witnesses included forensic experts who detailed the ballistics evidence and the brutality of the killings. But it was the testimony of those who knew the parties involved that proved most compelling. Former colleagues of Silas and Lachlan spoke of the obvious chemistry between the two men and of Madison's increasing isolation in the months leading up to the shooting. The defense called a series of expert witnesses, including psychologists who testified to Madison's fragile mental state and the extreme emotional trauma caused by discovering her husband's affair. Madison's own testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. In a voice barely above a whisper, she recounted the night she discovered Silas and Lachlan together and the overwhelming emotions that had driven her to violence. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. In a packed courtroom, with tension so thick it could be cut with a knife, the foreman stood to deliver their decision. On the charge of first-degree murder for the death of Silas Qualley, the jury found Madison Plemons guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree murder. For the death of Lachlan Frost, they again returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Judge had the unenviable task of determining Madison's fate. After hearing impassioned pleas from both the prosecution and defense, as well as impact statements from the families of Silas and Lachlan, the judge rendered her decision. Taking into account the circumstances of the crime and Madison's lack of prior criminal history, Judge Blackwell sentenced her to 20 years to life for each count, to be served concurrently. Madison would be eligible for parole after serving a minimum of 20 years. As Madison was led from the courtroom, the tragic saga that had gripped Pine Haven and the nation for months finally came to a close. Emily Parker was born and raised in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Ann Parker, were well-respected members of the community. Richard owned a local hardware store, while Ann was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother, Jack, and a younger sister, Sarah, was the apple of her parents' eyes. From an early age, Emily exhibited a zest for life. She was an exceptional student, excelling in her studies and participating in various extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching emerged during her high school years, inspired by a history teacher who brought the past to life in vivid detail. Emily pursued her dream by attending Ohio State University, where she earned her degree in education. After college, Emily returned to Maplewood and secured a teaching position at the local elementary school. Her dedication to her students was unparalleled. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm, and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. David, the eldest, grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort, their bungalow perched on the edge of a secluded cove. The first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic. Soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. Fellow diners noticed the couple laughing and holding hands, seemingly in love. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes' team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague, who requested anonymity, mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting, found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes' team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds' double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs. Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance and the subsequent focus on David threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily. According to his findings, Emily had discovered David's infidelity and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety, had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister, although the details were vague. This new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches, although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove. Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became an advocate for domestic abuse victims, sharing her story to help others in similar situations. The media's fascination with her life eventually faded, but Emily remained a symbol of resilience and survival. Detective Hayes reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It had been a journey through layers of deception and human frailty, revealing the dark complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. The resolution, while not entirely satisfying, brought a measure of justice and closure to those affected. In the end, the case of Emily Parker's disappearance was a stark reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction. and that beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, there can lie a twisted web of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The Carson family lived in a picturesque suburban neighborhood, the kind with neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and an aura of tranquility. Richard Carson, a well-respected accountant, and his wife, Sophia, a beloved elementary school teacher, seemed to embody the perfect American dream. They had 2 children, Anna and Tyler, who were the pride and joy of their parents. One crisp autumn morning, the facade of perfection shattered. Richard Carson returned home from a weekend fishing trip with his friends to find the house eerily silent. The usual warmth and cheer were absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. He called out for Sophia but received no response. Anxiety gnawed at him as he climbed the stairs to their bedroom. The sight that greeted him was every husband's nightmare. Sophia lay motionless on the bed, her skin a pale hue that contrasted starkly with the dark dried blood staining the sheets. Richard's heart pounded as he rushed to her side, desperately trying to shake her awake. It was futile. Sophia was gone. Richard's frantic call to 911 brought the police and paramedics rushing to the scene. They confirmed what Richard already knew. Sophia Carson was dead. The initial investigation began, with officers combing through the house for clues. Richard was in shock, barely able to process the questions thrown his way. Detective Sarah McMillan, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for her keen instincts, took charge of the case. She quickly established that there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Sophia knew her attacker. As the investigation progressed, Richard's alibi was scrutinized. His fishing buddies corroborated his story, placing him miles away at the time of Sophia's death. The community was in disbelief. The Carsons had always appeared to be the perfect couple, deeply in love and committed to their family. But as the days passed, whispers of Richard's suspected infidelity began to surface. Sophia's best friend Laura mentioned that Sophia had confided in her about her fears that Richard was cheating. This revelation cast a shadow of suspicion over Richard, despite his solid alibi. The media quickly picked up the story, painting a picture of a troubled marriage and a potential crime of passion. The pressure mounted on the police to solve the case, but with Richard's airtight alibi, they were at a loss. It was then that Sophia's sister, Megan, decided to take matters into her own hands. She hired a private investigator, Jake Thompson, to dig deeper into Sophia's suspicions and uncover the truth behind her sister's death. Richard and Sophia Carson's love story began in high school. They were the quintessential sweethearts, inseparable and deeply in love. After graduation, they went to college together, got married, and started a family. Their life seemed like a fairy tale, filled with love, success, and 2 beautiful children. Richard's career as an accountant flourished, and Sophia found her calling as a teacher. They were well liked in their community, active in local events, and always seen together at neighborhood gatherings. But beneath the surface, Sophia harbored growing suspicions about her husband's fidelity. It started with small things: late nights at the office, unexplained phone calls, and Richard's increasing emotional distance. Sophia confided in her best friend Laura, sharing her fears and doubts. Laura advised her to confront Richard, but Sophia was hesitant. She didn't want to believe that the man she loved could betray her. As months turned into years, Sophia's suspicions deepened. She found herself checking Richard's phone when he wasn't looking, scrutinizing his behavior for any signs of infidelity. Her anxiety grew, casting a shadow over her once happy marriage. She often asked Laura if she was overreacting, but Laura could see the toll it was taking on her friend. One evening, Sophia found a lipstick stain on Richard's collar. It was the final straw. She confronted him, demanding the truth. Richard denied any wrongdoing, insisting that it was a misunderstanding. He claimed he was loyal and devoted, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Their arguments became more frequent and intense. Sophia felt trapped in a web of doubt and mistrust, while Richard grew increasingly frustrated with her accusations. In her darkest moments, Sophia wondered if she was losing her mind. She contemplated hiring a private investigator, but feared what she might discover. Instead, she continued to confide in Laura, who remained her steadfast support. Laura, concerned for her friend's well-being, suggested they document everything. Sophia began keeping a journal, recording every suspicious incident, every fight, and every moment of doubt. She hoped that if the truth ever came out, she would have the evidence to confront Richard once and for all. Sophia's sister, Megan, was also aware of the tensions in the Carson household. She had always been close to Sophia and noticed the changes in her demeanor. Megan urged Sophia to take action, but Sophia remained paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. As the months passed, Sophia's suspicions became an all-consuming obsession. She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that her husband was leading a double life. It was this unrelenting doubt that ultimately led Megan to hire Jake Thompson, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice for her sister. Detective Sarah McMillan's team worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to Sophia Carson's death. They interviewed family, friends, and neighbors, trying to build a profile of Sophia's life and the possible motives for her murder. Richard's cooperation was noted, but his solid alibi kept him out of immediate suspicion. Megan, desperate for answers, turned to private investigator Jake Thompson. Jake was known for his tenacity and skill in uncovering hidden truths. With a career spanning over 2 decades, he had a reputation for solving the most challenging cases. When Megan approached him, he listened intently to her concerns about Richard's infidelity and Sophia's suspicions. Jake agreed to take the case, starting with a thorough review of Sophia's journal. The detailed entries painted a picture of a woman tormented by doubt and fear. Sophia's descriptions of Richard's behavior and her growing anxiety provided Jake with valuable insights into the possible cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage. Jake's first step was to delve into Richard's background. He conducted surveillance, followed Richard to work, and monitored his interactions. Richard appeared to be a devoted father and professional, but Jake knew better than to take things at face value. Interviews with Sophia's friends and colleagues revealed a woman who was deeply loved and respected. They spoke of her kindness, dedication to her students, and the love she had for her family. But they also mentioned the changes they had seen in her over the past few years. Laura, Sophia's best friend, was a crucial source of information. She shared the details of Sophia's fears and the confrontations she had with Richard. Laura also mentioned a woman named Carla Mason, a former colleague of Richard's who had once been very close to him. Sophia had always been wary of Carla, suspecting her of having an affair with Richard. Jake's investigation led him to Carla Mason. He dug into her background, uncovering a series of troubling details. Carla had a history of unstable relationships and a reputation for being manipulative. She had left the company where she worked with Richard under mysterious circumstances, and Jake's instincts told him there was more to the story. As Jake pieced together the puzzle, he began to see a pattern. Carla's presence in Richard's life, Sophia's escalating suspicions, and the sudden violent end to Sophia's life were all connected. He knew he was onto something significant, but he needed concrete evidence to prove Carla's involvement. Jake intensified his surveillance on Carla, watching her every move. He interviewed her acquaintances, piecing together a profile of a woman driven by jealousy and obsession. It became clear that Carla harbored a deep resentment towards Sophia, viewing her as the obstacle to her happiness with Richard. With the pieces falling into place, Jake prepared to confront Carla, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice for Sophia Carson. Jake Thompson was no stranger to the darker side of human nature. With years of experience as a private investigator, he had seen it all: infidelity, fraud, even murder. But the Carson case had a complexity that intrigued him. As he delved deeper, the tangled web of deceit and betrayal began to unravel. Richard Carson, on the surface, was a model husband and father, but Jake's investigation revealed another side to him. Richard had indeed been unfaithful, and his affair with Carla Mason was more than a fleeting indiscretion. Carla Mason was a striking woman in her early 30s, with a magnetic presence that drew people to her. She had met Richard when they both worked at the same accounting firm. Their affair began innocently enough, with shared lunches and late-night conversations, but it quickly escalated into a passionate and clandestine relationship. Jake's surveillance provided him with the evidence he needed. He captured photos of Richard and Carla meeting in secret, their intimate moments betraying the depth of their connection. But it wasn't just the affair that caught Jake's attention. It was Carla's behavior. She was possessive, obsessive, and clearly driven by a desire to replace Sophia in Richard's life. Jake's investigation into Carla's past revealed a troubled history. She had grown up in a dysfunctional family, with a mother who was emotionally distant and a series of abusive relationships. These experiences had left Carla with deep emotional scars and a desperate need for validation and love. When she met Richard, she saw him as her ticket to a better life, a chance to escape her past and find happiness. But Carla's obsession with Richard took a dark turn when she realized he would never leave Sophia. Despite Richard's promises and assurances, he remained with his wife, further fueling Carla's resentment. She began to see Sophia as the obstacle standing between her and the life she desired. Her jealousy grew, and with it, a dangerous resolve. Jake's breakthrough came when he discovered a series of emails between Carla and Richard. In them, Carla expressed her frustration and anger, accusing Richard of leading her on and demanding that he leave Sophia. Richard's responses were apologetic, but non-committal, indicating his reluctance to abandon his family. One email in particular stood out. It was sent a week before Sophia's death. Carla had written a long emotional message, threatening to expose their affair if Richard didn't take action. She hinted at a plan to remove Sophia from the picture, a chilling foreshadowing of the tragedy that would soon unfold. Armed with this evidence, Jake intensified his efforts to link Carla directly to the crime. He interviewed her former colleagues and friends, uncovering a pattern of manipulative and unstable behavior. They described Carla as someone who would go to great lengths to get what she wanted, often using deceit and emotional manipulation to achieve her goals. One colleague in particular provided a crucial piece of information. He recalled a conversation with Carla where she had fantasized about a life with Richard, free from the constraints of his marriage. She had spoken with a chilling detachment about the possibility of Sophia disappearing, a comment that now took on a sinister significance. Jake knew he was close. He gathered all the evidence he had collected and prepared to confront Carla. He needed her to confess, to break under the weight of the truth. Carla Mason's affair with Richard Carson had started with innocent flirtation and grown into a full-blown obsession. She had fallen hard for Richard, seeing him as her escape from a life of loneliness and pain. But as their relationship deepened, so did her jealousy and desire to replace Sophia Carson. The affair began 3 years prior, at an office holiday party. Richard, charming and attentive, had noticed Carla sitting alone and struck up a conversation. They found common ground in their love for their work and shared frustrations about their personal lives. Richard confided in Carla about his strained marriage, while Carla shared her dreams of finding true love. Their connection was instant and electric. Soon they were meeting for lunches, then dinners, and finally secret rendezvous at hotels. Richard was careful to keep their affair hidden, but Carla's feelings for him grew stronger with each passing day. She fantasized about a future where they could be together openly, free from the constraints of his marriage. Carla's fantasies, however, were marred by the reality of Sophia's existence. Every time Richard went home to his wife, Carla's resentment festered. She started to view Sophia as the obstacle to her happiness, the barrier standing between her and the life she wanted with Richard. Carla's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would call Richard at all hours, demanding to know where he was and who he was with. She became possessive, monitoring his social media and showing up unannounced at his office. Richard, initially flattered by her attention, began to feel trapped by her neediness. The breaking point came when Carla discovered that Richard had lied to her about spending a weekend with Sophia. Enraged, she confronted him, demanding that he choose between her and his wife. Richard, caught off guard by her intensity, tried to calm her down. He promised he would leave Sophia, but deep down he knew he couldn't follow through. As Carla's obsession grew, so did her hatred for Sophia. She started to stalk her, learning her routines and habits. Carla would drive by the Carson house late at night, watching from the shadows as Sophia went about her life. Her anger boiled over as she saw the life she wanted being lived by another woman. Carla's plan to remove Sophia took shape over several months. She began to fantasize about ways to eliminate her rival, her thoughts growing darker and more dangerous. The email she sent to Richard, threatening to expose their affair, was a desperate attempt to force his hand. But when he failed to act, Carla decided to take matters into her own hands. On the night of the murder, Carla waited until she knew Richard was away on his fishing trip. She had meticulously planned every detail, from disabling the security cameras to ensuring she left no trace of her presence. She broke into the Carson house using a spare key Richard had given her, moving silently through the darkened rooms. Sophia was asleep when Carla entered the bedroom. The sight of her rival, peaceful and unaware, fueled Carla's rage. She approached the bed, a knife clutched tightly in her hand. Sophia woke up just as Carla lunged, but it was too late. The attack was swift and brutal, driven by years of pent-up anger and resentment. After the deed was done, Carla stood over Sophia's lifeless body, a mixture of triumph and horror washing over her. She had done it. She had removed the obstacle to her happiness. But as the adrenaline faded, the reality of her actions set in. She quickly wiped down the surfaces she had touched, making sure to leave no evidence behind. Then she slipped out of the house and disappeared into the night. Carla believed she had committed the perfect crime, but Jake Thompson's investigation unraveled her carefully constructed alibi. His surveillance and interviews revealed the depth of her obsession and the lengths she had gone to in order to be with Richard. The evidence he gathered painted a chilling picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and willing to kill to get what she wanted. As Jake prepared to confront Carla, he knew that her fragile psyche would be her undoing. The weight of her guilt, combined with the mountain of evidence against her, would be too much for her to bear. It was only a matter of time before she broke under the pressure and confessed to her heinous crime. Jake Thompson meticulously gathered the evidence needed to build an airtight case against Carla Mason. He knew that to secure a conviction, every detail had to be scrutinized and every lead followed. His investigation had revealed Carla's obsessive behavior, her deep-seated resentment towards Sophia, and the lengths she went to in order to be with Richard. Now it was time to piece it all together. Jake's first task was to consolidate the surveillance footage and photographs he had taken of Carla and Richard. The images clearly showed their intimate relationship, disproving any claims that Carla might make about their affair being over. These visual proofs were crucial in establishing Carla's motive. Next, Jake focused on the emails between Carla and Richard. The threatening messages Carla had sent, demanding that Richard leave Sophia or face the consequences, were damning evidence of her intent. Jake printed out the emails, highlighting the passages where Carla hinted at drastic measures if she didn't get her way. Jake also gathered testimonies from Carla's former colleagues and acquaintances. One witness, a close friend of Carla's, reluctantly shared a conversation they had just days before Sophia's murder. Carla had expressed a disturbing desire for Sophia to disappear, even making offhand remarks about how easy it would be to make it happen. This testimony painted a clear picture of Carla's premeditation. The most crucial piece of evidence, however, came from the crime scene itself. Jake had worked closely with Detective Sarah McMillan, sharing his findings and collaborating on the investigation. Forensic analysis revealed traces of Carla's DNA on the knife used to kill Sophia, as well as on the bedroom door handle. Despite her efforts to clean up, Carla had made critical mistakes that tied her directly to the murder. Jake and Sarah also discovered a partial fingerprint on the windowsill where Carla had entered the house. While it wasn't a complete match, it added to the mounting evidence against her. Jake knew that these physical proofs, combined with the digital and testimonial evidence, created a compelling case. With everything in place, Jake turned his attention to Carla's acquaintances. He interviewed neighbors, friends, and even casual acquaintances, piecing together a profile of a woman driven by desperation and jealousy. One neighbor recalled seeing Carla's car parked near the Carson house on several occasions, further corroborating her stalking behavior. The final piece of the puzzle came from a surprising source. Richard, racked with guilt and realizing the extent of Carla's obsession, agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. He provided additional emails and messages from Carla, as well as his own account of their relationship. Richard's testimony was crucial in establishing the timeline and confirming Carla's motives. Jake presented his findings to Detective McMillan, who was impressed by the thoroughness of the investigation. Together, they compiled a detailed report outlining Carla's motives, actions, and the overwhelming evidence against her. The case was ready to go to trial. Carla was arrested at her apartment, her shocked expression revealing her belief that she had gotten away with murder. As the police led her away in handcuffs, Jake felt a sense of satisfaction. He had uncovered the truth and ensured that justice would be served for Sophia Carson. The legal proceedings were swift. Carla's defense tried to argue that she had been framed, but the evidence was irrefutable. The emails, the forensic evidence, and the testimonies painted a clear picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and willing to kill to achieve her desires. In the end, Carla was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Richard's involvement, though not criminal, left a stain on his reputation and devastated his family. The Carson children, Anna and Tyler, faced a future without their mother and with a father whose actions had indirectly led to her death. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, those left behind struggled to find a sense of normalcy. The Carson family's once bright future was now overshadowed by loss and betrayal. Sophia's absence was a constant presence in their lives, a void that could never be filled. Megan, Sophia's sister, took on the role of guardian for Anna and Tyler. She moved into the Carson home, providing stability and support for the children. Megan's bond with her niece and nephew deepened as they navigated their shared grief. Together, they honored Sophia's memory, finding comfort in the love she had given them. Laura, Sophia's best friend, also played a crucial role in helping the family heal. She organized memorial events, celebrating Sophia's life and the impact she had on those around her. The community rallied together, offering support and love to the Carson children, ensuring they knew they were not alone. Richard, burdened by guilt and remorse, sought therapy to confront his actions and the consequences they had wrought. He knew he could never undo the pain he had caused, but he hoped to find a path to redemption. Richard's journey was one of self-reflection and accountability, a long and difficult process of coming to terms with his past. As the years passed, Anna and Tyler grew up, carrying with them the lessons of their mother's life and the strength of their Aunt Megan's love. They pursued their dreams, determined to honor Sophia's memory through their actions and achievements. The scars of their past remained, but they found ways to move forward, holding on to the positive memories of their family. The Carson case, with all its twists and tragedies, became a beacon of resilience for the community. It reminded them of the fragility of life and the strength that could be found in unity and support. Remington Harlow, a successful software engineer, and his wife Cordelia, a talented interior designer, were the picture of marital bliss to their friends and neighbors. Their home, with its manicured lawn and white picket fence, stood as a testament to their seemingly perfect life. But beneath the surface, a dark current was stirring. Remington's growing fascination with a taboo fantasy would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter their idyllic existence and end in tragedy. What began as a consensual exploration of desires would spiral into a maelstrom of jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately murder. Remington Harlow was born in 1985 to a middle-class family in Eugene. From an early age, he displayed a keen intellect and a fascination with computers. His parents, both educators, nurtured his interests, and by the time he entered high school, Remington was already coding his own programs. Despite his academic prowess, he struggled socially, often feeling awkward and out of place among his peers. Cordelia Astor, born in 1987, grew up in a wealthy family in Seattle, Washington. The youngest of 3 children, she was vivacious and creative from the start. Her parents, successful real estate developers, provided her with every opportunity, including art classes and interior design courses. Their paths crossed in 2005 at Reed College in Portland. Remington, a junior computer science major, literally bumped into Cordelia, a freshman art student in the campus library. He was immediately smitten by her radiant smile and effortless charm. Cordelia, in turn, found herself drawn to Remington's quiet intensity and brilliant mind. Their courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual discussions, late-night coding sessions, where Cordelia would sketch while Remington typed, and explorations of Portland's eclectic art scene. Despite their different backgrounds and personalities, they found in each other a perfect complement. They married in 2009, shortly after Cordelia's graduation. The wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard in the Willamette Valley, was a joyous affair that seemed to portend a bright future. Remington had already secured a high-paying job at a tech startup in Portland, while Cordelia began to make a name for herself in the city's competitive interior design market. For the first few years of their marriage, life seemed perfect. They bought their dream home in Oak Ridge, traveled the world, and built a wide circle of friends. Remington's career soared as he climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a senior engineer at a tech firm. Cordelia's design business flourished, with her work featured in several magazines. From the outside, the Harlows appeared to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a strong, loving marriage. But as they entered their 30s, subtle cracks began to form in their seemingly flawless facade, setting the stage for the tumultuous events to come. As the Harlows approached their 10th wedding anniversary, a restlessness began to creep into their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly had dimmed to a comfortable, but sometimes monotonous glow. Remington, always introspective, found himself increasingly drawn to online forums and discussions about alternative sexual lifestyles. It started innocently enough, a curiosity about what other couples did to spice up their love lives. But as Remington delved deeper into these virtual communities, he became particularly fascinated by the concept of cuckolding. The idea of watching his wife with another man, of being a voyeur to her pleasure, awakened something within him. At first, Remington kept these thoughts to himself, ashamed and confused by the intensity of his desires. He would stay up late, ostensibly working, but in reality, he was consuming every piece of cuckold-related content he could find. Cordelia, perceptive as ever, sensed the change in her husband. She noticed his distraction, the way his eyes would sometimes glaze over during their conversations, the increased frequency of his late nights at the computer. Concerned, she gently probed, asking if everything was all right, if work was becoming too stressful. Finally, after weeks of internal struggle, Remington decided to broach the subject with Cordelia. One evening over a bottle of wine, he haltingly confessed his newfound interest. He spoke of his desires, his curiosity about exploring this fantasy, all the while watching Cordelia's face for signs of disgust or rejection. To his surprise and relief, Cordelia didn't recoil. Instead, she listened with an open mind, asking thoughtful questions about what exactly appealed to him about this scenario. While she expressed initial reservations, she also admitted to a certain intrigue. The idea of being desired by another man, of being the center of attention, held its own allure. This conversation marked a turning point in their marriage. What had been a private fantasy for Remington was now out in the open, a possibility to be explored together. Neither of them could have predicted the profound impact this revelation would have on their lives, or the dangerous path it would ultimately lead them down. The Harlows' foray into the world of cuckolding began cautiously. They set ground rules, discussed boundaries, and agreed to take things slowly. But finding the right person to introduce into their marriage proved challenging. They wanted someone attractive and charismatic, but also discreet and respectful of their arrangement. Enter Thaddeus Blackwood. Cordelia met him at a charity art auction in downtown Portland. Tall, with piercing green eyes, Thaddeus exuded a magnetic charm that drew people to him. As the owner of a successful art gallery, he moved effortlessly through Portland's cultural elite, his wit and knowledge making him the center of attention at any gathering. Cordelia was immediately drawn to Thaddeus's sophisticated aura. They spent the evening in animated conversation about emerging artists and the latest trends in interior design. When Thaddeus casually mentioned being unattached and open to new experiences, Cordelia felt a spark of excitement. She relayed her encounter to Remington that night, watching his eyes light up as she described Thaddeus. They agreed that he might be the perfect candidate for their exploration. Remington encouraged Cordelia to nurture the connection, his excitement palpable. Over the next few weeks, Cordelia and Thaddeus met for coffee several times, ostensibly to discuss potential collaborations between his gallery and her design firm. Each time, Cordelia returned home to regale Remington with stories of their encounters, stoking the flames of his fantasy. Finally, after a particularly flirtatious meeting, Cordelia decided it was time to broach the subject with Thaddeus. To her surprise and delight, he was intrigued by the proposition. He admitted to having participated in similar arrangements before and understood the delicacy required. With Thaddeus on board, the stage was set for the Harlows to turn fantasy into reality. Little did they know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would irrevocably change their lives. The night of the first encounter arrived with a mix of nervous energy and excited anticipation. Remington and Cordelia had spent weeks planning every detail, from the ambient lighting in their bedroom to the bottle of expensive champagne chilling in an ice bucket. Thaddeus arrived at 8 p.m. sharp, looking dashing in a tailored charcoal suit. He brought with him a bouquet of exotic flowers for Cordelia and a rare bottle of scotch for Remington, a gesture that impressed them both with its thoughtfulness. The evening began in the living room with drinks and light conversation. Thaddeus regaled them with stories from the art world, his charisma on full display. Cordelia, dressed in a slinky black dress, laughed at his jokes and touched his arm with increasing frequency. Remington watched from his armchair, a tumbler of scotch in hand, his heart racing with every interaction between his wife and their guest. As the night progressed and the alcohol flowed, the atmosphere grew charged with sexual tension. Finally, with a meaningful look at Remington, Cordelia took Thaddeus by the hand and led him upstairs. In the bedroom, Remington settled into a corner armchair as Cordelia and Thaddeus began to kiss passionately. When Thaddeus and Cordelia finally fell onto the bed, their bodies entwined, Remington felt a potent mix of arousal and an unexpected twinge of jealousy. The encounter itself was intense and passionate. Remington watched, transfixed, as his fantasy played out before his eyes. The reality was more visceral, more overwhelming than he had imagined. Afterwards, as they all lay spent and silent, Remington felt a complex swirl of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. His long-held fantasy had been realized, but there was also a nagging sense of unease, a feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Thaddeus left shortly after, with promises to stay in touch. As Remington and Cordelia lay in bed, discussing the evening's events in hushed, excited tones, neither could have predicted how this first encounter would set the stage for the tragedy to come. They had opened Pandora's box, and there would be no closing it again. Encouraged by the success of their first foray into cuckolding, they eagerly arranged more meetings with Thaddeus. What had started as a monthly indulgence quickly became then weekly. Each encounter seemed to push the boundaries further, with Thaddeus staying longer, the sessions growing more intense and intimate. Remington's role began to evolve as well. Cordelia said in an interview that he was initially content to watch from afar. He found himself drawn closer to the action. Sometimes he would join in, and that the dynamics of power and control within their bedroom became increasingly complex. Outside of their encounters, Thaddeus began to integrate more into their lives. He would join them for dinner, accompany Cordelia to art exhibitions, even spend weekends at their home. His charm and wit made him a delightful companion, and the Harlows found themselves enjoying his company even when action wasn't on the agenda. As spring turned to summer, Remington's initial excitement began to give way to a gnawing sense of discomfort. He started to notice small but significant changes in Cordelia's behavior. She seemed distracted during their alone time, her mind elsewhere. She began to dress up more often, even on days when they had no plans with Thaddeus. One evening, Remington came home early from work to find Cordelia on the phone, speaking in hushed, intimate tones. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call, claiming it was just a client. But Remington couldn't shake the feeling that she had been talking to Thaddeus. In bed, Cordelia's passion seemed to have cooled. She was still enthusiastic during their encounters with Thaddeus, but alone with Remington, she often seemed tired or disinterested. Remington found himself initiating sex more often, only to be gently rebuffed. Remington tried to reassert control over the situation. He suggested taking a break from their arrangement, perhaps going on a vacation, just the two of them. But Cordelia seemed reluctant, always finding reasons to delay or change the subject. His work began to suffer as he spent hours analyzing every interaction, every text message, every glance between Cordelia and Thaddeus. He started checking Cordelia's phone when she wasn't looking, scrutinizing her social media activity, even contemplating following her when she went out alone. Remington knew he was spiraling, but he felt powerless to stop it. The game he had initiated was slipping out of his control, and he was terrified of losing Cordelia. As his anxiety grew, so did his determination to put an end to the situation he had created, by any means necessary. The breaking point came on a warm July evening. Remington had planned a romantic dinner at home, hoping to reconnect with Cordelia and discuss his growing concerns. He had left work early, bought her favorite wine, and spent hours preparing an elaborate meal. But as the sun began to set and the candles burned low, Cordelia was nowhere to be seen. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Hours ticked by, the carefully prepared food growing cold on the table. When she finally stumbled in shortly before midnight, her hair disheveled and lipstick smudged, Remington's worst fears seemed confirmed. The argument that ensued was explosive. Remington, his emotions amplified by alcohol and hours of anxious waiting, unleashed all the fears and suspicions he'd been harboring. He accused Cordelia of falling in love with Thaddeus, of making a fool of him, of destroying their marriage. Cordelia, caught off guard and defensive, initially tried to deflect. She claimed she'd lost track of time at a client meeting, that her phone had died. But faced with Remington's relentless questioning and the evidence of her appearance, she finally broke down and admitted she had been with Thaddeus. The confession hit Remington like a physical blow. He had suspected, had feared, but hearing it confirmed shattered something inside him. In that moment, all the excitement and thrill of their arrangement went away. Cordelia, tears streaming down her face, tried to explain. She loved Remington, she insisted, but Thaddeus made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She was confused, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her deepening emotions for Thaddeus. Remington, his voice low and dangerous, demanded that she end things with Thaddeus immediately. Cordelia, her own anger rising, refused. This had been Remington's idea in the first place, she argued. He couldn't dictate her feelings or control her relationships. The argument escalated, with both of them saying hurtful things they would later regret. Remington, in a moment of rage, smashed a wine glass against the wall. Cordelia, shocked by this uncharacteristic display of violence, retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind her. Remington spent the night on the couch, his mind racing, unable to sleep. In the days following their confrontation, a chilling calm settled over the Harlow household. Cordelia and Remington moved around each other like ghosts, barely speaking, the tension palpable. Cordelia spent most of her time out of the house, throwing herself into her work, and Remington suspected meeting with Thaddeus. Remington, for his part, retreated into a dark place within himself. He called in sick to work, spending his days in a haze of alcohol and paranoid thoughts. He scoured Cordelia's computer and phone for evidence of her relationship with Thaddeus, meticulously documenting every text, every call, every unexplained absence. Remington began to fantasize about confronting Thaddeus, about making him pay for destroying his marriage. At first, these were just harmless daydreams, a way to vent his frustration. But as the days wore on and Cordelia grew more distant, these fantasies took on a darker, more violent tone. One afternoon, while Cordelia was at a client meeting, Remington found himself in their garage holding the heavy wrench he used for home repairs. As he felt its weight in his hand, a chilling thought crossed his mind. It should be so easy to end this, and to eliminate the threat to his marriage once and for all. Horrified by the direction of his thoughts, Remington dropped the wrench and fled the garage. But the seed had been planted. As he paced the house, gulping down glasses of whiskey, the idea took root and grew. By the time night fell, what had started as a fleeting, horrifying thought had crystallized into a plan. August 15th dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. Remington woke early, his head pounding from another night of heavy drinking, but his resolve unwavering. Today would be the day he confronted Thaddeus, the day he reclaimed control over his life and his marriage. He spent the morning in a feverish state of preparation. He showered, shaved, and dressed with meticulous care, as if preparing for an important business meeting rather than the violent confrontation he was planning. In the garage, he selected the wrench he had held days earlier, wrapping it in a towel and placing it in a nondescript gym bag. Cordelia left for work around 9 a.m., barely acknowledging Remington as she rushed out the door. As soon as she was gone, Remington got into his car and drove to Thaddeus's gallery. He parked across the street, watching as Thaddeus arrived, greeting his employees with his characteristic charm. For hours, Remington sat in his car. As closing time approached, Remington watched Thaddeus bid goodbye to his last customer and begin closing up the gallery. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With shaking hands, he grabbed the gym bag and crossed the street. Thaddeus was locking the gallery door when Remington approached. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into a wary smile. "Remington," he said, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" Remington felt a surge of rage at Thaddeus's casual tone, as if he hadn't been destroying Remington's life for months. Without conscious thought, he swung the gym bag, catching Thaddeus off guard and sending him stumbling back against the gallery door. What followed was a blur of violence and desperation. Remington pulled out the wrench, swinging it wildly as Thaddeus tried to defend himself. But Remington was beyond reason. Every blow was fueled by months of jealousy, insecurity, and rage. When it was over, Remington stood panting over Thaddeus's motionless body, the wrench slick with blood in his trembling hand. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just killed a man. He had just destroyed his own life in a futile attempt to save it. Remington went through the motions of covering his tracks. He dragged Thaddeus's body into the alley behind the gallery, hiding it behind a dumpster. He wiped down the door handle and any surfaces he might have touched. Then, still in a state of shock, he drove home, the weight of his actions settling over him like a shroud. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Remington pulled into his driveway, the rain washing away the blood on his hands, but doing nothing to cleanse his conscience. The hours following the murder passed in a nightmarish blur for Remington. He stumbled into the house, barely making it to the bathroom before violently emptying the contents of his stomach. As the adrenaline wore off, the full impact of his actions hit him. He had killed a man. He was a murderer. Operating on autopilot, Remington set about destroying evidence. He burned his clothes in the backyard fire pit, scrubbed the car clean, and took a shower. When Cordelia came home, Remington had composed himself enough to feign normalcy. He greeted her with forced cheerfulness, suggesting they order takeout and watch a movie. As they sat on the couch, the TV flickering unwatched, Remington's mind raced. He knew it was only a matter of time before Thaddeus's body was discovered. He needed an alibi, a story to tell when the inevitable questions came. He casually mentioned to Cordelia that he had spent the day at home catching up on work and doing some yard work. He even showed her a small cut on his hand, claiming he had nicked himself while pruning the rose bushes, a cut that had actually come from his struggle with Thaddeus. 2 days after the murder, the news broke. Thaddeus Blackwood, prominent art dealer and fixture of Portland's cultural scene, had been found dead behind his shop. The police were treating it as a homicide. Remington learned of the discovery while at work, overhearing colleagues discussing the shocking news. He felt the blood drain from his face, his hands shaking so badly he had to excuse himself to the restroom. The investigation moved quickly. Detective Eliana Rossi, a veteran of the Police Bureau's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She and her team combed through Thaddeus's life, interviewing friends, family, and business associates. It didn't take long for them to uncover Thaddeus's relationship with the Harlows. Cordelia, devastated by the news of Thaddeus's death, initially tried to downplay their connection, but faced with evidence from Thaddeus's phone records and witness accounts, she eventually admitted to their affair. When the police came to interview Remington, he was prepared. He expressed shock and sadness at Thaddeus's death, acknowledging that while their arrangement had been unconventional, he had considered Thaddeus a friend. He calmly recounted his movements on the day of the murder, his story aligning perfectly with what he had told Cordelia. Detective Rossi, however, sensed something off about Remington's demeanor. His calm seemed forced, his grief a touch too performative. She made a mental note to dig deeper into his background and movements. As the investigation progressed, the police began to piece together a timeline of Thaddeus's last day. Security footage from nearby businesses showed him entering the gallery in the morning but never leaving. His last phone call had been to Cordelia, ending abruptly around closing time. The net was slowly closing around Remington. As the days turned into weeks, Cordelia's grief over Thaddeus's death deepened. She threw herself into her work, often staying late at the office, avoiding the stilted silences that now characterized her home life with Remington. At first, Remington's attentiveness in the wake of the tragedy had touched her. He seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being, always ready with a comforting word or a shoulder to cry on. But as time passed, she began to notice inconsistencies in his behavior. Cordelia found herself revisiting the events leading up to Thaddeus's death. She remembered Remington's jealousy, his desperate pleas for her to end the affair. The more she thought about it, the more a terrible suspicion began to take root in her mind. She started paying closer attention to Remington's actions, noting when he left the house, checking his browser history when he wasn't around. She even considered hiring a private investigator, but couldn't bring herself to take that final step. As her suspicions grew, so did her fear. If Remington was capable of what she was beginning to suspect, what else might he be capable of? For the first time in their marriage, Cordelia found herself afraid of her husband, unsure of the man she had promised to love for better or worse. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A homeless man, known to frequent the alley behind Thaddeus's gallery, came forward with information. He claimed to have seen a man matching Remington's description entering the alley on the night of the murder, carrying a gym bag. This new lead energized the investigation. Detective Rossi and her team began to scrutinize Remington's movements more closely. They discovered traffic camera footage that contradicted his alibi, showing his car near the gallery around the time of the murder. As the evidence mounted, Remington's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily, snapping at colleagues, and becoming paranoid about being followed. Cordelia, her own suspicions now seeming confirmed, began to distance herself from him, staying with a friend under the guise of needing space to grieve. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the police, armed with a search warrant, found small traces of blood in Remington's car that matched Thaddeus's DNA. They also discovered the murder weapon, the blood-stained wrench that Remington had hidden in the attic, unable to bring himself to dispose of it completely. On a rainy September morning, nearly a month after Thaddeus's death, Detective Rossi arrived at the Harlow residence with a team of officers. They found Remington sitting in the living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. As the detective read him his rights, Remington offered no resistance. In that moment, he felt an odd sense of relief. The game was over. The lies, the fear, the constant vigilance. It could all stop now. Remington Harlow's trial was brief but sensational. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, his confession a rambling account of jealousy, fantasy, and fatal obsession. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Cordelia, shattered by the revelation of her husband's actions, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She sold their house, unable to live with the memories it held, and moved out of state to start a new life. Andrew and Paula Keene's love story began like many others in Pinewood, at the annual Harvest Festival 15 years earlier. Andrew, then a shy graduate student, had volunteered to run the physics demonstration booth. Paula, home from college for the weekend, found herself captivated by his passionate explanation of physics. Their courtship was a whirlwind of outdoor adventures and cozy evenings, discussing their dreams for the future. Paula was drawn to Andrew's quiet intensity and brilliant mind, while Andrew was in awe of Paula's confidence and zest for life. They married 2 years later in a simple ceremony by Pinewood Lake, their vows echoing off the surrounding mountains as friends and family cheered. The early years of their marriage were filled with the joy of building a life together. They bought a charming craftsman-style home on Maple Street, its wraparound porch soon cluttered with Paula's collection of potted herbs and Andrew's telescope. Weekends were spent hiking the nearby trails or hosting game nights with their growing circle of friends. To the outside world, the Keenes appeared to be the perfect couple, supportive, affectionate, and deeply in sync. But as time passed, small fissures began to appear in their relationship. Paula's career in marketing took off, bringing with it late nights at the office and frequent business trips. Andrew, content with his position as a high school teacher, struggled to understand his wife's drive for professional success. He began to feel left behind, his world shrinking as Paula's expanded. Their conversations, once flowing freely, became stilted and superficial. Paula found herself frustrated by Andrew's reluctance to try new experiences or socialize outside their established routines. Andrew, in turn, felt increasingly inadequate in the face of Paula's vibrant social life and career achievements. Attempts to rekindle their connection often fell flat. A romantic getaway to the Oregon coast ended in tense silence as they realized how little they now had in common. Date nights became an exercise in checking boxes rather than genuinely connecting. Even their physical intimacy waned, with both making excuses to avoid the awkwardness of forced passion. It was in this fragile state that Paula Keene first crossed paths with David Reeves, setting in motion a chain of events that would shatter the delicate equilibrium of their marriage and lead to consequences neither could have imagined. The seeds of Paula and David's affair were planted on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the Pinewood Business Association mixer. Paula, representing her marketing firm, found herself drawn to the charismatic newcomer who spoke passionately about revitalizing the town's visual branding. David's enthusiasm was infectious, and Paula soon realized an hour had passed in what felt like minutes. Over the following weeks, their paths continued to cross professionally. Paula's firm hired David for a series of projects, necessitating frequent meetings and collaboration. What began as a working relationship quickly evolved into a friendship, with shared lunches extending well beyond the allotted hour as they discovered a mutual love for contemporary art and obscure indie films. Paula found herself looking forward to their interactions, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. David's attentiveness and genuine interest in her thoughts made her feel seen in a way she had long forgotten. For his part, David was captivated by Paula's quick wit and the passion that shone through when she spoke about her work. The line between professional and personal blurred one evening after a particularly successful presentation to a client. Flush with victory, Paula and David decided to celebrate with drinks at a bar on the outskirts of town. As the night wore on and inhibitions lowered, their conversation turned more intimate. David's hand brushed against Paula's, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. It was Paula who made the first move, leaning in to kiss David as they stood in the parking lot. The kiss, fueled by alcohol and long-suppressed desire, quickly deepened. Their first clandestine rendezvous took place at a small bed and breakfast in the next town over. As they fell into each other's arms, all thoughts of consequences faded away. In the afterglow, tangled in rumpled sheets, Paula and David convinced themselves that what they had found was too precious to give up, and so began a careful dance of stolen moments and secret meetings, each rendezvous adding another layer to the web of deceit that would ultimately ensnare them all. For months, Andrew Keene remained blissfully unaware of his wife's infidelity. He attributed Paula's improved mood and renewed energy to a positive shift in her work life. However, as winter gave way to spring, small inconsistencies began to gnaw at the edges of his consciousness. It started with little things: Paula's sudden interest in obscure bands she'd never mentioned before, hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he entered the room, and an inexplicable nervousness whenever plans changed unexpectedly. Andrew initially dismissed these observations, not wanting to acknowledge the growing unease in the pit of his stomach. The pivotal moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Paula had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and as Andrew reached past it to grab a mug, a notification flashed across the screen. The message preview from an unsaved number read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last time was..." Andrew's hand froze mid-air. He knew he shouldn't look, that doing so would violate Paula's privacy. But the seed of suspicion, once planted, grew rapidly. With trembling fingers, he opened the message thread. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Months of intimate exchanges, thinly veiled references to secret meetings, and declarations of passion scrolled before his eyes. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when he saw a photo David had sent. Nauseated and shaking, Andrew closed the laptop and retreated to the basement, his mind reeling. When Paula returned home that evening, she found him sitting in the dark, his eyes red-rimmed and distant. The confrontation that followed was brutal in its rawness. Paula, caught off guard, initially tried to deny everything, but faced with the evidence Andrew had discovered, she finally broke down and confessed to the affair. As Paula sobbed and attempted to explain, Andrew listened in stony silence. When she finished, he stood up and walked out of the room without a word, leaving Paula alone with the wreckage of their marriage strewn around her. In the days following his devastating discovery, Andrew Keene surprised everyone with his apparent, calm acceptance of the situation. When Paula, racked with guilt, offered to move out, Andrew insisted she stay. He spoke of forgiveness, of working through their issues together, and of his enduring love for her despite her transgression. Paula, overwhelmed with relief at this unexpected reprieve, threw herself into rebuilding their relationship. She ended things with David in a terse phone call, blocking his number and social media accounts. She suggested couples therapy, date nights, and even a second honeymoon to rekindle their connection. To their friends and colleagues, the Keenes presented a united front. They were seen holding hands at the farmers' market, laughing together at local events, and Andrew even surprised Paula with flowers at her office. Many in Pinewood commented on how the couple seemed stronger than ever, admiring their ability to weather such a storm. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, a very different reality was unfolding. Andrew's forgiveness was a masterful performance, concealing a heart twisted by betrayal
and a mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. Each gentle word and loving gesture was calculated, designed to lull Paula into a false sense of security while he grappled with his growing obsession. Late at night, while Paula slept, Andrew would lie awake, his mind replaying imagined scenes of his wife in David's arms. He began keeping a journal, filling pages with dark musings and elaborate fantasies of confronting his wife's lover. The act of writing these thoughts became a pressure valve, allowing him to maintain his cool exterior. While his inner turmoil intensified, Paula, eager to believe in their reconciliation, overlooked the subtle signs of Andrew's internal struggle. As weeks turned into months, the charade became second nature to Andrew. He played the role of the forgiving husband with chilling precision, all while his resentment festered and grew. He began to view his performance as a cosmic joke, taking a perverse pleasure in how easily everyone, especially Paula, bought into the illusion. As summer faded into autumn, Andrew Keene's carefully maintained facade began to crack under the weight of his growing obsession. At school, Andrew found himself unable to focus on his lessons, his mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Paula and David together. He snapped at students for minor infractions, his usual patience evaporating like morning dew. Colleagues noticed the change, whispering concerns about his erratic behavior in the teacher's lounge. As his jealousy deepened, Andrew's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He installed a hidden GPS tracker on Paula's car, justifying the invasion of privacy as necessary to ease his fears. Late at night, he would pore over her location data, constructing elaborate scenarios to explain any deviation from her usual routes. Andrew's once diverse interests narrowed to a singular focus, monitoring Paula and by extension David. He created fake social media accounts to follow David online, scrutinizing every post and interaction for any hint of continued contact with Paula. Hours were spent driving past David's apartment and office, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything to confirm his suspicions. The turning point came on an October evening. Andrew, having convinced himself that Paula was meeting David after work, followed her to a small art gallery downtown. As he watched from across the street, he saw Paula emerge from the gallery, laughing and chatting with a group of colleagues. There was no sign of David. In that moment, something inside Andrew snapped. The realization that his suspicions were unfounded did nothing to quell the rage and humiliation that had been building for months. Sitting in his car watching Paula drive away, Andrew made a decision. If reality wouldn't conform to his suspicions, he would force it to do so. He would create a situation that would justify his jealousy, his anger, and ultimately, the retribution he now craved. The location was his first major decision. Andrew knew the crime scene needed to be isolated enough to avoid witnesses, but not so remote as to arouse suspicion. After careful consideration, he settled on an abandoned lumber mill on the outskirts of town. The dilapidated building, slated for demolition in the coming year, offered both privacy and multiple access points. Next came the question of method. Andrew wanted something that would be difficult to trace back to him, ruling out firearms or any weapon he would need to purchase. After much deliberation, he decided on a garrote, silent, effective, and easily made from household materials. Piece by piece, Andrew accumulated the necessary supplies. He bought lengths of wire from different hardware stores across the county, paying cash each time. Gloves, bleach, and other cleaning supplies were added to regular shopping trips in small quantities to avoid arousing suspicion. He crafted a fake email account under the guise of a local arts organization. He composed a message to David, inviting him to participate in a secretive art installation project at the mill. The email emphasized the need for discretion, explaining that the project was meant to be a surprise for the community. Andrew knew that David's ego and artistic ambitions would make such an offer irresistible. As he waited for David to take the bait, Andrew fine-tuned the details of his plan. He meticulously cleaned his car, removing any traces of hair or fibers that could later implicate him. He purchased a burner phone with cash from a convenience store 2 towns over, using it to communicate with David under the guise of the arts organization coordinator. The night before the planned meeting, Andrew made a final visit to the lumber mill. He cleared a path through the debris, ensuring he would have a clean line of sight from his hiding spot to the entrance. With gloved hands, he positioned the garrote wire behind a stack of rotting pallets, ready to be grabbed at a moment's notice. As he stood in the musty darkness of the mill, the reality of what he was about to do finally hit Andrew. With grim determination, Andrew left the mill and drove home, knowing that the next time he returned it would be to commit murder. Andrew Keene went through the motions of his morning routine, kissing Paula goodbye with a casualness that belied the turmoil roiling within him. He taught his classes on autopilot, his mind fixated on the events to come. As the final bell rang, Andrew hurried to his car, his heart pounding. He drove to the lumber mill, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. Parking a quarter-mile away, he donned a pair of nondescript boots he'd purchased for the occasion and made his way to the mill on foot. Inside the dilapidated structure, Andrew positioned himself behind the stack of pallets, the garrote wire coiled in his gloved hands. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each sound from outside sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. At precisely 4:30 p.m., the crunch of tires on gravel announced David's arrival. Andrew held his breath as footsteps approached, echoing in the cavernous space. David's voice called out tentatively, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Andrew remained perfectly still, watching as David moved further into the mill. When David's back was turned, Andrew emerged from his hiding spot, wire at the ready. In 3 quick strides, he was behind David. Before David could fully register the presence behind him, Andrew looped the wire around his throat and pulled tight. David's hands flew up, clawing desperately at the wire cutting into his neck. He thrashed violently, his elbow catching Andrew in the ribs with surprising force. The struggle seemed to last an eternity. Andrew's arms burned with the effort of maintaining his grip as David fought for his life. Gradually, David's movements became weaker, his gasps for air more sporadic. With one final convulsive shudder, David Reeves went limp in Andrew's arms. Andrew held on for several minutes more, ensuring that no life remained in his rival's body. When he finally released his grip, David crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. Panting heavily, Andrew stared down at the lifeless form before him. The reality of what he had done crashed over him in waves. He had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared him for the stark finality of taking a human life. Moving as if in a trance, Andrew began the process of cleaning up the scene. He collected stray fibers from David's clothing, pocketing them to dispose of later. Using bleach he had stashed earlier, he meticulously cleaned any surfaces he or David might have touched. As the light outside began to fade, Andrew dragged David's body to a pre-dug hole in the far corner of the mill. He covered the shallow grave with debris, knowing that the impending demolition would further conceal his crime. Before leaving, Andrew took one last look around the mill with a mix of horror and grim satisfaction. Andrew realized that he had done it. He had committed the perfect murder. Driving home, Andrew found Paula already there, preparing dinner. He forced himself to act normally, commenting on the meal and asking about her day with casualness. Over the next few days, Andrew was hyper-aware of every news report and passing police car. He scoured local news websites for any mention of David's disappearance, but found nothing. The lack of immediate alarm was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. Paula, oblivious to the turmoil beneath her husband's calm exterior, commented on how much more relaxed Andrew seemed lately. She attributed it to their efforts at reconciliation, never suspecting the dark truth behind his changed demeanor. A week after the murder, the first signs of concern about David's whereabouts began to surface. His clients reported missed deadlines and unanswered calls. Friends posted on social media, asking if anyone had heard from him. Andrew watched these developments with a mixture of dread and perverse fascination. When the police finally became involved, Andrew was ready. He had prepared a detailed account of his movements on the day of David's disappearance, complete with fabricated receipts and a meticulously edited digital trail. He even mentioned to Paula in earshot of a neighbor that he hoped that nice graphic designer was okay, establishing an alibi of concern. As the investigation gained momentum, Andrew found himself drawn into the search efforts. He volunteered to help distribute flyers and even organized a search party to comb areas of Pinewood Park. His apparent dedication to finding David threw off any suspicion that might have fallen on him. But beneath his helpful exterior, Andrew was constantly on edge. Every unexpected knock at the door sent his heart racing. He began to have vivid nightmares of David's final moments, waking up drenched in sweat. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, a constant, invisible burden that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. As days turned into weeks with no sign of David Reeves, the Pinewood Police Department intensified its investigation. Detective Laura Stewart, a recent transfer from Portland with a reputation for solving cold cases, was assigned to lead the inquiry. Stewart's first step was to retrace David's last known movements. Interviews with his clients and friends painted a picture of a man who had been excited about an upcoming art project, though details were frustratingly vague. Stewart's interest was piqued by mentions of a secretive installation at an undisclosed location. The detective's scrutiny soon turned to David's personal life. It didn't take long for rumors of his affair with Paula Keene to surface. Stewart approached the subject delicately in her interview with Paula, who admitted to the past indiscretion but insisted it had ended months ago. Andrew, present for the interview, played the part of the supportive husband perfectly, expressing sympathy for David's disappearance despite the history. As Stewart dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. David's bank records showed no unusual activity, and his passport remained in his apartment. His car was found parked at his residence, ruling out the possibility that he had simply left town. The more Stewart investigated, the more convinced she became that David had met with foul play. A breakthrough came when a hiker reported finding David's phone in Pinewood Park, miles from his usual haunts. Forensic analysis revealed that the phone had been wiped clean of data, an act that struck Stewart as deliberate and suspicious. With each new piece of evidence, the circle of suspects narrowed. Stewart found herself returning again and again to the Keenes. Paula's affair provided a motive, but her genuine distress seemed authentic. Andrew's alibi was solid, yet something about his too perfect responses nagged at Stewart's instincts. As autumn deepened into winter, the case consumed Detective Stewart. She spent long nights poring over evidence, convinced that the key to unraveling the mystery lay somewhere in the complex web of relationships surrounding David Reeves. Little did she know, the truth was far closer and far more chilling than she could have imagined. The turning point in the investigation came on a frigid December morning, 3 months after David Reeves's disappearance. A team of surveyors, assessing the old lumber mill for demolition, made a grisly discovery. Partially unearthed by recent heavy rains, David's decomposing body was found in a shallow grave. Detective Stewart and her team descended on the scene, meticulously combing the area for evidence. Despite Andrew's careful cleanup, trace evidence remained. Fibers matched to David's clothing were found embedded in the floorboards, and DNA analysis of the soil revealed blood spatter consistent with a violent struggle. The discovery of the body shifted the investigation into high gear. Stewart re-interviewed everyone connected to David, this time with a sharper focus. It was during her second conversation with Andrew Keene that things began to unravel. Stewart noticed subtle inconsistencies in Andrew's story, minor details that didn't quite align with his previous statements. His demeanor, once calmly cooperative, now had an undercurrent of nervousness. When Stewart casually mentioned that they had surveillance footage from near the lumber mill, she saw a flicker of panic cross Andrew's face before he quickly composed himself. That momentary lapse was all Stewart needed. She intensified her questioning, probing deeper into Andrew's alibi for the day of David's disappearance. Under the relentless pressure, Andrew's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a dramatic turn, Andrew broke down and confessed to the murder. He recounted the entire sordid tale, his discovery of the affair, his months of secret planning, and the final fatal confrontation at the lumber mill. As he spoke, it was as if a dam had burst, years of pent-up emotion pouring out in a torrent of words. Paula, brought in for questioning separately, was shattered by the revelation. She struggled to reconcile the loving, forgiving husband she thought she knew with the man capable of such a calculated act of violence. Her world, already fragile from the strain of the affair and its aftermath, collapsed entirely. As news of Andrew's confession spread, the town of Pinewood reeled in shock. The image of the Keenes as the perfect couple, even in the face of adversity, was shattered. Friends and colleagues struggled to understand how they could have missed the signs of Andrew's deteriorating mental state. In the following weeks, more details emerged. His internet search history revealed months of research on undetectable poisons and body disposal methods. The depth of his obsession and the meticulous nature of his planning chilled even the most seasoned detectives. Andrew Keene was charged with first-degree murder. As he awaited trial, psychologists debated whether his actions were the result of temporary insanity or a more deep-seated pathology. Paula, grappling with her own guilt and the traumatic loss of both her lover and her husband, retreated from public life.
The case of David Reeves's murder would long be remembered in Pinewood as a tragic reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. It served as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of jealousy and the unforeseen consequences of betrayal, forever changing the way the town viewed itself and its inhabitants. The year was 2018, and what began as a seemingly ordinary romance between two young adults would spiral into a nightmare that no one could have foreseen. Michelle Marsters, a 26-year-old aspiring writer with a troubled past, and Jake Brendan, a 28-year-old software engineer from a close-knit family, were an unlikely pair. Their whirlwind romance captivated their friends and family at first, but as time went on, those closest to them began to sense that something was amiss. Michelle Marsters' childhood was a tapestry of instability and emotional turmoil. Born to a single mother who struggled with substance abuse, Michelle spent her formative years bouncing between relatives' homes and foster care. The constant upheaval left deep scars on her psyche, manifesting in an intense fear of abandonment and a desperate need for control in her relationships. As a teenager, Michelle found solace in writing, pouring her pain and longing onto the pages of countless journals. Her talent for crafting vivid narratives earned her a scholarship to a local community college, where she excelled in creative writing courses. However, her personal life remained tumultuous, marked by a series of volatile relationships that always seemed to end in heartbreak and betrayal. Jake Brendan, on the other hand, grew up in a warm and loving household. The middle child of three, Jake was raised by parents who prioritized family bonds and open communication. Family dinners were a nightly occurrence in the Brendan home, and weekends were often spent on camping trips or gathered around board games. This nurturing environment fostered Jake's natural inclination towards kindness and his strong sense of loyalty to those he loved. Academically gifted, Jake breezed through school and earned a full ride to a prestigious university where he studied computer science. His easygoing nature and quick wit made him popular among his peers, and he maintained a close circle of friends from high school through his college years. Michelle and Jake's paths crossed at a local coffee shop. Michelle, hunched over her laptop, was startled when Jake accidentally bumped into her table, nearly spilling her latte. Flustered, Jake insisted on buying her a new drink, and what started as an awkward encounter quickly blossomed into an engaging conversation about literature, technology, and their shared love of obscure indie films. Drawn to Jake's warmth and stability, Michelle found herself opening up in a way she never had before. Jake, in turn, was captivated by Michelle's passion for storytelling and her apparent vulnerability. They exchanged numbers that night, and within weeks they were practically inseparable. The early days of their relationship were a whirlwind of romantic gestures and shared adventures. Michelle introduced Jake to the world of local poetry slams and art galleries, while Jake taught Michelle the basics of coding and took her on hikes to his favorite scenic spots. To their friends, they seemed like the perfect couple, Jake's calm demeanor perfectly complementing Michelle's creative energy. However, as the honeymoon phase began to wane, subtle cracks started to appear in their idyllic romance. Michelle's need for constant reassurance and her discomfort with Jake's close relationships with his family and friends began to surface. What Jake initially perceived as endearing clinginess slowly morphed into something more sinister. As Michelle and Jake's relationship progressed past the 6-month mark, the initial euphoria of new love began to give way to a more complex and troubling dynamic. Michelle's past traumas and abandonment issues, long simmering beneath the surface, started to manifest in increasingly problematic ways. It started subtly at first. Michelle would text Jake incessantly throughout the day, growing anxious and irritable if he didn't respond promptly. She began to question his whereabouts when they weren't together, often asking for photographic evidence of his location. Jake, attributing this behavior to Michelle's deep affection for him, initially found it endearing and did his best to accommodate her needs. However, Michelle's demands for Jake's time and attention soon began to escalate. She would grow visibly upset when Jake made plans with his friends or family, often guilt-tripping him into canceling to spend time with her instead. Jake's best friend since childhood, Michael, was the first to voice his concerns. During a rare guys' night out, Michael confronted Jake about his increasing absence from their social circle. "Jake, you've barely hung out with us in months. What's going on, man? Is everything okay with you and Michelle?" Jake brushed off Michael's worries, insisting that he was just busy and that everything was fine. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right in his relationship with Michelle. As weeks turned into months, Michelle's behavior became increasingly erratic and controlling. She began to monitor Jake's social media accounts, questioning him about every female interaction, no matter how innocuous. She insisted on knowing his phone password and would often scroll through his messages while he slept. Jake's family, once warmly welcoming of Michelle, started to grow wary of her influence on their son and brother. Sarah Brendan, Jake's mother, was particularly concerned. She noticed how Jake had become withdrawn and less communicative, a stark contrast to the open and affectionate son she had raised. During a family dinner that Michelle reluctantly attended, tensions came to a head. When Sarah innocently asked Jake about his plans to attend his cousin's upcoming wedding, Michelle interjected before he could respond. "We're actually thinking of taking a trip that weekend, aren't we, Jake?" she said, her voice sickly sweet but her eyes flashing with warning. Jake, caught off guard, stumbled through a non-committal response, much to his family's visible dismay. After dinner, Sarah pulled her son aside, her voice low and urgent. "Jake, honey, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you missing family events, barely calling. Is everything all right with Michelle?" Michelle, overhearing the exchange, flew into a rage on the drive home. She accused Jake of allowing his family to come between them, twisting the situation to paint herself as the victim. "Your mother hates me, Jake. She's trying to poison you against me. Can't you see that?" Torn between his love for Michelle and his deep-rooted family ties, Jake found himself walking an increasingly precarious tightrope. He began to make excuses to his family and friends, gradually withdrawing from social engagements and family gatherings to keep the peace with Michelle. As Jake's world shrank to revolve almost entirely around Michelle, her paranoia and possessiveness only intensified. She began to see threats to their relationship everywhere, in Jake's co-workers, in casual interactions with strangers, and especially in his family's attempts to maintain a connection with him. As Michelle's grip on Jake's life tightened, a part of him began to resist. The values instilled by his upbringing, the importance of family, the strength of long-standing friendships started to reassert themselves. This internal conflict came to a head on a chilly November evening, nearly a year into their relationship. Jake received a call from his sister, Lauren, informing him that their father had been hospitalized with a suspected heart attack. Without hesitation, Jake grabbed his keys, ready to rush to the hospital. Michelle, however, had other ideas. "Jake, you can't go," she pleaded. "We were supposed to have dinner together. You promised." Jake, torn between his worry for his father and his fear of upsetting Michelle, tried to reason with her. Michelle's face contorted with rage. "Your family again," she spat. "They're always trying to take you away from me. If you leave now, don't bother coming back." For the first time, Jake saw through the haze of manipulation. The absurdity of Michelle's demand in the face of a family emergency snapped something inside him. Without another word, he walked out the door, leaving Michelle screaming behind him. At the hospital, surrounded by the warmth and support of his family, Jake felt as if he was waking from a long, confusing dream. His father's condition, thankfully, turned out to be less serious than initially feared. As Jake sat in the waiting room, his mother gently broached the subject they had all been avoiding. Jake, his defenses weakened by the night's events, finally opened up. He shared with his mother the extent of Michelle's controlling behavior, her jealousy, and her attempts to isolate him. Sarah listened, her heart breaking for her son, but also relieved that he was finally seeing the truth. Over the next few days, as his father recovered, Jake spent more time with his family. He reconnected with friends he had neglected, realizing how much he had missed their company. Michelle's incessant calls and messages went unanswered, as Jake took time to reflect on their relationship. When Jake finally returned to the apartment he shared with Michelle, he was resolved to end things. Michelle, however, sensed the shift in Jake's demeanor and launched into a preemptive attack. "It's your mother, isn't it? She's turned you against me. I knew she hated me." Michelle's words devolved into a torrent of abuse aimed at Jake's family, particularly his mother. "Jake, I can't do this anymore. I won't cut my family out of my life for you or anyone else." As Jake turned to leave, Michelle's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. Jake left, shaken but determined, unaware of the chilling prophecy contained in Michelle's parting words. The events of March 15, 2019 would forever be etched in the memories of Queenstown's residents. It began as an ordinary Friday, people hurrying to work, children boarding school buses, the usual rhythm of small-town life in full swing. For Sarah Brendan, it started as a day like any other, filled with routine tasks and errands. Sarah had just returned home from her morning yoga class, her mind preoccupied with plans for the weekend. Jake had promised to come over for a family dinner on Sunday, the first in months, and Sarah was determined to make it special. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street, but thought nothing of it. Humming softly, Sarah unlocked her front door and stepped inside, her arms laden with groceries. She didn't notice the shadow that detached itself from the side of the house and silently followed her in. Michelle Marsters, her eyes wild with a manic gleam, had been waiting for hours. In her delusional state, she had convinced herself that Sarah was the root of all her problems. Remove Sarah, she thought, and Jake would be hers completely. As Sarah bent to set her bags on the kitchen counter, Michelle struck. With a guttural cry of rage, she brought a heavy cast-iron skillet, grabbed from Sarah's own kitchen, crashing down on the woman's head. Sarah crumpled to the floor, dazed and disoriented. Blood trickled from a gash on her scalp. Michelle, consumed by her frenzy, didn't stop. She brought the skillet down again and again, Sarah's weak attempts at self-defense growing feebler with each blow. When it was over, Michelle stood panting over Sarah's motionless form. Blood spattered her clothes and face. In Michelle's twisted mind, she had done what was necessary. She had eliminated the threat to her relationship with Jake. Now, she reasoned, he would have no choice but to turn to her for comfort and support. With a clinical detachment that would later disturb even seasoned investigators, Michelle set about staging the scene. She ransacked the house, overturning furniture and emptying drawers, creating the illusion of a robbery gone wrong. She pocketed Sarah's jewelry and cash, planning to dispose of them later. In the bathroom, Michelle scrubbed the blood from her skin and changed into clean clothes she had brought with her. She wrapped her stained garments and the skillet in a plastic bag, intending to discard them far from the scene. As a final touch, Michelle used Sarah's own phone to send a text to Jake. "Looking forward to Sunday dinner, sweetheart. Love you." It was a chilling detail that would later send shivers down the spines of those involved in the case. Confident that she had covered her tracks, Michelle left the Brendan home as quietly as she had entered. To any passers-by, she would have looked like any other young woman going about her day, not someone who had just committed a brutal murder. Michelle drove to a remote area outside of town, where she burned her bloodied clothes and tossed the skillet into a deep pond. Returning to her apartment, Michelle began to craft her alibi. She called a friend, chatting normally about weekend plans. She posted on social media, careful to establish a timeline that placed her far from the Brendan home at the time of the murder. Then she waited. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, Michelle's phone rang. It was Jake, his voice cracking with emotion. "Michelle," he sobbed, "something terrible has happened. It's my mom, she's dead." Michelle's performance was Oscar-worthy. She gasped in shock, her voice filled with false concern and sympathy. "Oh my God, Jake, what happened? Are you okay? Where are you? I'm coming right over." Everything was going according to plan. Soon, she thought, Jake would be utterly dependent on her. The discovery of Sarah Brendan's body sent shockwaves through the quiet community. Jake, worried when his mother didn't answer his calls about Sunday dinner, had driven to her house to check on her. The scene that greeted him would haunt him for years to come. Detective Lisa Martinez, a veteran of the police department, took charge of the investigation. From the moment she stepped into the Brendan home, something about the scene didn't sit right with her. While it appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, certain details nagged at her experienced instincts. The house had been ransacked, true, but in a way that seemed almost methodical, rather than the chaotic ransacking typical of a panicked burglar. Valuable electronics were left untouched, while jewelry and cash were missing. Most tellingly, there were no signs of forced entry. As the forensics team combed through the house, Detective Martinez began the painful process of interviewing the family. Jake, still in shock, could barely string together coherent sentences. His father, recently released from the hospital, was devastated and confused. It was Jake's sister Lauren who provided the first piece of the puzzle that would ultimately lead to Michelle. Detective Lauren said, "I don't know if this is important, but Jake's girlfriend, Michelle, she's been acting really strange lately. She seemed obsessed with Jake, always trying to keep him away from us. Martinez's interest was piqued. She gently probed for more information, and Lauren opened up about the gradual isolation Jake had experienced, the tension between Michelle and their mother, and the recent confrontation that had led to Jake spending more time with his family. The detective's suspicions grew as she interviewed Jake's friends and coworkers. A picture began to emerge of Michelle as a controlling, paranoid partner who had systematically attempted to cut Jake off from his support network. However, suspicion was not proof, and Martinez knew she needed hard evidence. Forensics provided the next breakthrough. Despite the killer's efforts to clean up, trace amounts of blood were found in areas inconsistent with the location of Sarah's body. DNA analysis would later confirm it was a mix of Sarah's blood and the killer's. Moreover, fibers found on Sarah's clothing didn't match anything in her home. Martinez's team began the painstaking process of checking traffic cameras and interviewing neighbors. One elderly woman recalled seeing a car similar to Michelle's parked on the street the morning of the murder, but couldn't be certain. As the investigation progressed, Martinez brought Michelle in for questioning. Michelle arrived at the station projecting an image of concern and cooperation, but the detective's trained eye noted the subtle signs of anxiety, the slight tremor in her hands, the occasional darting of her eyes. "Michelle," Martinez began, her tone casual, "can you tell me where you were on the morning of March 15th? Michelle's response was smooth, rehearsed. She claimed to have been at a local cafe, working on her latest writing project. She even produced a receipt as proof, but something about her story didn't add up. Martinez decided to take a risk. "Michelle," she said, leaning forward, "we have a witness who saw your car near the Brendan home on the morning of the murder. Want to revise your statement?" Michelle's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of panic in her eyes, a slight hitch in her breathing. She quickly recovered, vehemently denying the accusation, but Martinez had seen enough. The investigation was far from over, but Martinez felt they were on the right track. Little did she know that the case was about to break wide open, thanks to an unexpected source, Jake himself. In the days following his mother's murder, Jake Brendan found himself in a fog of grief and confusion. Michelle was a constant presence, offering comfort and support. As the initial shock began to wear off, Jake started to notice inconsistencies in Michelle's behavior that gnawed at him. It was a small thing that first aroused his suspicions. While looking for a photo of his mother for the funeral service, Jake came across Michelle's journal. Normally, he would have respected her privacy, but a nagging feeling prompted him to open it. What he found chilled him to the bone. Page after page was filled with increasingly paranoid and violent rants about his mother. "Sarah's trying to turn him against me. She has to be stopped. I'm the only one who truly loves him." The last entry, dated the day before the murder, read simply, "Tomorrow I'll fix everything." He wanted to dismiss the idea, but too many pieces were falling into place. Michelle's obsessive behavior, her hatred of his mother, her insistence on being with him constantly since the murder. Torn between his loyalty to Michelle and his growing suspicions, Jake decided to confide in Detective Martinez. He brought the journal to the police station, his hands shaking as he handed it over. "I think Michelle might have had something to do with my mom's death." Martinez's team quickly obtained a warrant to search Michelle and Jake's apartment. Hidden in the back of a closet, they found a bag containing Sarah's missing jewelry. In a stroke of luck, the pond where Michelle had disposed of the murder weapon had been partially drained for maintenance, revealing the blood-stained skillet. As the evidence mounted, Michelle's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Her alibi fell apart under scrutiny. The cafe receipt she had produced was for a different day, and security footage showed her car leaving town in the direction of the Brendan home on the morning of the murder. Jake, grappling with the betrayal and the horrifying realization of what Michelle had done, agreed to cooperate with the police. In a recorded phone call, he confronted Michelle about his suspicions. Caught off guard, Michelle's responses were incriminating. "Why did you do it, Michelle? I loved you." Michelle's response was chilling in its delusion. "I did it for us, Jake," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Your mother was trying to keep us apart. Now we can be together forever. Don't you see? It was the only way." With this final piece of evidence, Detective Martinez moved to make an arrest. The stage was set for Michelle's arrest, but even Martinez couldn't have predicted the dramatic turn of events that would unfold as they moved to take her into custody. Michelle, unaware that her world was about to come crashing down, was inside a bookstore. Martinez had decided on a public arrest to minimize the risk of Michelle doing something desperate. As Michelle exited the store, two plainclothes officers approached her casually. "Michelle Marsters?" One of them said. "We need you to come with us." For a moment, Michelle froze, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Then, in a burst of panic, she turned and ran. She made it only a few steps before Martinez tackled her to the ground. As the detective handcuffed her, Michelle began to scream. "You don't understand. I did it for love. Jake needs me." At the police station, Michelle was led to an interrogation room where Martinez was waiting. For hours, Michelle maintained her innocence, her story becoming increasingly convoluted as she tried to explain away the evidence. Martinez watched patiently, waiting for the right moment to break through Michelle's defenses. Finally, as exhaustion and the weight of her lies began to take their toll, Martinez played her trump card. She placed Jake's journal in front of Michelle. "Jake found your journal. He knows what you did." The effect was immediate. Michelle's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He wasn't supposed to find out," she whispered. "It was supposed to be our fresh start." What followed was a chilling confession that left even the seasoned detective shaken. Michelle described in vivid detail how she had planned and carried out Sarah's murder, her voice devoid of remorse as she recounted the brutal attack. "I had to do it," Michelle insisted, her eyes fever-bright. "Sarah was poisoning Jake against me. She never understood our love. With her gone, Jake would need me. We would be together forever." When the confession was complete, Michelle seemed to deflate, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked, suddenly sounding very young and afraid. The prosecutor presented a methodical, airtight case. She walked the jury through the evidence: the DNA found at the crime scene, the murder weapon recovered from the pond, the damning entries in Michelle's journal, and finally, Michelle's own recorded confession. Perhaps the most powerful moment of the prosecution's case came when Jake took the stand. His testimony was heart-wrenching, detailing the gradual isolation he experienced and his growing unease with Michelle's behavior. The defense faced an uphill battle. Given the overwhelming evidence, Stevenson opted for a mental health defense, arguing that Michelle's troubled background and psychological issues had left her incapable of distinguishing right from wrong. Psychiatrists took the stand, offering conflicting opinions on Michelle's mental state. Dr. Samantha Wright, testifying for the defense, diagnosed Michelle with borderline personality disorder and argued that her extreme fear of abandonment had driven her to commit the murder. Throughout the trial, Michelle sat at the defense table, often appearing detached from the proceedings. After a week-long trial, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned after just 6 hours with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Michelle finally broke her eerie calm, collapsing in sobs. Michelle Marsters, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, retreated into a world of fantasy behind bars. She continued to write, filling notebooks with stories of star-crossed lovers and tragic romances, unable or unwilling to fully grasp the reality of her crimes. For the residents of Queenstown, the case served as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from where we least expect them. It was a tragedy that would be remembered for years to come, a cautionary tale about the dark side of love and the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession.